Hannah Campbell's train pulled into Silvidge Station 24 hours late, her heart pounding with the terror of disappointing a man she'd never met. But nothing could have prepared her for the station master's words. "James Blackwell? Shot dead 2 days ago, ma'am." 1 day late, and the stranger who'd promised her a new life was already in the ground. Standing alone on that windswept platform with nothing but a worn satchel and shattered dreams, Hannah faced the most terrifying question of her life. What now? If you're watching this story unfold, please stay until the very end to see how Hannah's tragedy transforms into something beautiful. And don't forget to comment with your city or country so I can see how far this tale of love and second chances has traveled across the world. Now, let me take you back to that fateful day in 1875 Colorado territory. The train's whistle cut through the Colorado twilight like a wounded animal's cry, and Hannah Campbell pressed her gloved hand against the soot-stained window, watching the desolate landscape roll past. Silvidge Station was supposed to have appeared an hour ago, then 2 hours ago. Now, as the sun bled crimson across the horizon and shadows stretched long across the prairie, she realized with mounting dread that she was arriving a full day behind schedule, 24 hours late to meet her future husband, a man she'd never seen except in one faded photograph, a man whose careful, measured letters had convinced her to leave everything she'd ever known in Boston and journey 3,000 miles west to become his wife. Hannah's fingers trembled as they traced the outline of the last letter in her pocket, the paper soft from countless readings. "Miss Campbell," it had begun in James Blackwell's precise script. "I am not a man of poetry or flowery words, but I am a man of my word. I have a good ranch, a sound house, and a life that needs a woman's grace to make it complete. If you can find it in your heart to trust a stranger, I promise you'll want for nothing and be treated with the respect every woman deserves. I'll be waiting at Silvidge Station on October 15th at 2 o'clock sharp. Yours in hopeful anticipation, James Blackwell." October 15th, 2 o'clock sharp. It was now October 16th, and the sun was setting. "Silvidge Station! Next stop, Silvidge Station!" The conductor's voice boomed through the car, jolting Hannah from her spiral of anxiety. She smoothed down her travel-worn dress, the best she owned, navy blue with modest lace at the collar, now wrinkled and dusty despite her efforts to keep it pristine. Her auburn hair, carefully arranged that morning in Boston, was it really only 3 days ago? Had largely escaped its pins during the endless journey. She looked, she knew, like exactly what she was. A desperate woman who'd gambled everything on a stranger's promise. The train lurched and groaned, metal screaming against metal as it slowed. Through the window, Hannah caught her first glimpse of Silvidge, a collection of rough-hewn buildings huddled against the vast emptiness of the Colorado plains. It looked even smaller and more isolated than she'd imagined, which was saying something. The station itself was little more than a wooden platform with a small office attached, weathered gray by wind and time. Her heart hammered as the train shuddered to a final stop. Around her, the other passengers, mostly men in dusty work clothes, gathered their belongings with practiced efficiency. She was the only woman in the car, and she'd felt their curious and sometimes unsettling stares throughout the journey. "End of the line, miss," the conductor said, appearing beside her seat. His weathered face softened with something like pity. "You got folks meeting you here?" "Yes," Hannah said, her voice steadier than she felt. "Yes, I do." But as she stepped onto the platform, clutching her single battered satchel that contained everything she now owned in the world, that certainty evaporated like morning dew under a merciless sun. The platform was nearly empty. A few men loaded cargo onto a waiting wagon. A woman with 2 small children hurried toward a man who swept them up with obvious joy. A dog nosed around the station office, searching for scraps. No tall rancher waited with hat in hand and hope in his eyes. No James Blackwell. Hannah set down her satchel and smoothed her dress again, a nervous habit. Perhaps he'd been delayed. Perhaps he'd grown tired of waiting yesterday and would return today, just in case. The thought made her stomach clench with shame. What kind of man would want a bride who couldn't even arrive on time? "Help you, miss." She turned to find an elderly man with a silver mustache emerging from the station office, a green eye shade pushed back on his weathered forehead. "Yes, thank you." Hannah straightened her shoulders, determined to maintain some dignity. "I'm looking for James Blackwell. He was supposed to meet me here. I'm She hesitated over how to describe herself. I'm expected at his ranch. The man's expression changed instantly, shifting from mild curiosity to something else. Something that made Hannah's blood run cold. Pity. Deep, profound pity. You're the mail-order bride, he said softly. It wasn't a question. I prefer to think of myself as his intended, Hannah replied with as much dignity as she could muster, though her heart had begun to race with a nameless dread. Is Mr. Blackwell here? I know I'm late. The train was delayed in Kansas City. But if you could direct me to… Miss… The station master removed his eye shade completely, his weathered hands twisting it unconsciously. Miss, I'm real sorry to be the one to tell you this, but James Blackwell, he's dead. The world tilted. Hannah's satchel slipped from her numb fingers and hit the platform with a dull thud. The sounds around her, the stamp of horses' hooves, the creak of wagon wheels, the distant laughter of the reunited family, all seemed to come from very far away, muffled as if she were underwater. What? She whispered. Happened 2 days ago. He was in town, at the Silver Star Saloon, when a card game went bad. Stranger accused him of cheating, which was a damn lie, pardon my language, miss. James Blackwell was as honest as they come. But this fellow, he was drunk and mean, and before anyone could stop him, he drew his gun. The station master shook his head sadly. James was dead before he hit the floor, shot through the heart. 2 days ago. While Hannah had been on a train somewhere in Kansas, worrying about arriving on time and making a good impression, the man who'd promised her a future had been bleeding out on a saloon floor. I see, Hannah heard herself say, though she didn't see at all. The world had gone strange and distant, like she was watching herself from somewhere outside her own body. We buried him yesterday, up on the hill behind the church. Reverend Morrison gave him a real nice service. Half the town turned out. James was well liked around here. The station master's voice was kind but helpless. I'm powerful sorry, miss. You come all this way, and now… He didn't finish the sentence, but he didn't need to. Now what? The question hung in the air between them, vast and terrible. Hannah forced herself to think, though her mind felt sluggish, struggling through thick mud. She had $17.32 in her reticule. The train ticket back to Boston would cost… She didn't even know, but certainly more than $17. And even if she could afford the ticket, what waited for her back east? Nothing. That was the brutal truth. She'd left Boston because there was nothing for her there. Her parents, gone 5 years now in the typhoid epidemic. Her brother Thomas, lost at sea just last year. The cramped room she'd shared with 3 other girls at the textile mill, working 14-hour days for wages that barely kept her fed. The foreman with wandering hands and alcohol-heavy breath who'd made it clear that her continued employment depended on being friendlier. She'd answered James Blackwell's advertisement in the Matrimonial Times because staying in Boston meant slowly dying by inches, her youth and health ground away by the mill's relentless machinery and the city's indifferent cruelty. But now, James Blackwell was dead, and she was 3,000 miles from Boston with $17 to her name and nowhere to go. The enormity of her situation crashed over her like a wave, stealing her breath. Her knees went weak, and she reached out blindly for support, finding the rough wood of a platform post. She clung to it, her vision swimming. Easy there, miss. The station master gripped her elbow, steadying her. When's the last time you ate? Hannah tried to remember. A stale biscuit this morning? Or was that yesterday morning? The days had blurred together during the long journey. I'm not sure, she admitted. You're white as a ghost. Come on, let's get you inside and sitting down before you fall down. He guided her gently toward the station office, a small room that smelled of coal oil and tobacco. A pot-bellied stove radiated welcome warmth, and Hannah sank onto a hard wooden bench, her legs simply giving out beneath her. The station master disappeared, and Hannah sat in the gathering darkness, staring at nothing. Outside, the last of the day's light bled from the sky, leaving the world cold and gray. She should feel something, she thought distantly. Grief for James Blackwell, perhaps, though how could you grieve a stranger? Fear for her future? Anger at the cosmic joke of arriving one day too late? But she felt nothing, just a vast, hollow numbness. The station master returned with a tin cup of water and a cloth-wrapped bundle. My wife sent this over, says you're to eat every bite. It's her cornbread and some cold chicken. I couldn't possibly. You can and you will, miss. You eat that, and then we'll figure out what's to be done. The food tasted like sawdust in Hannah's mouth, but she forced herself to eat, knowing she'd need her strength for whatever came next. The station master busied himself with closing up the office for the night, giving her space to compose herself. She'd just finished the last of the cornbread when the door opened, bringing a gust of cold evening air and the figure of a man. A tall man, broad-shouldered and lean, with dark hair that needed cutting and several days' worth of stubble shadowing his jaw. He wore the practical clothes of a working rancher, worn denim pants, a faded blue shirt, a leather vest scarred by hard use. His boots were dusty, and his hands, when he removed his hat, showed the calluses and scars of constant labor. But it was his eyes that caught Hannah's attention, blue as a mountain lake, set in a face that was weathered and hard-lived but not unkind. Those eyes found her immediately, and something flickered in them. Recognition, perhaps, or pity. She was growing wearily familiar with pity. "Jed," the man said, nodding to the station master. Then turning fully to Hannah, "You're James's mail-order bride, aren't you?" There was no accusation in his voice, just a quiet, rough gentleness that made Hannah's throat tighten dangerously. She nodded, not trusting her voice. "Thought so. I'm Colton Sullivan. James and we were friends, good friends. I'm the one who found him after—" He paused, his jaw tightening. "After it happened." "I'm Hannah Campbell," she managed, the social niceties falling from her lips automatically despite the unreality of the situation. "I'm very sorry for your loss." Something that might have been bitter amusement crossed Colton Sullivan's weathered face. "I'm sorry for yours, Miss Campbell. You came a long way for a future that's not waiting." The blunt truth of it hit harder than any gentle platitude could have. Hannah felt her carefully maintained composure begin to crack. "I was late," she heard herself say, her voice thin and strange. "The train was delayed in Kansas City. There was a problem with the engine, and we sat there for 8 hours. I was supposed to arrive yesterday, but I was late, and now he's—" Her voice broke. "If I'd been on time, maybe I could have—" "No." Colton's voice cut through her rising hysteria with firm kindness. "Don't do that to yourself, Miss Campbell. What happened to James had nothing to do with you. He went into town for supplies, got into the wrong place at the wrong time with the wrong man. You being here a day earlier wouldn't have changed a damn thing, pardon my language. But now I'm here, and he's gone, and I don't—" Hannah pressed her hands to her face, feeling the hot sting of tears she'd been holding back since the station master's terrible announcement. "I don't know what to do." A heavy silence filled the small office. Through her fingers, Hannah heard the soft creak of leather as Colton shifted his weight, the distant bark of a dog outside, the whistle of wind through the station eaves. "Miss Campbell," Colton said finally, his voice low and careful, "you shouldn't face this town alone tonight. My sister Sarah runs a boarding house here in Silvage, clean, respectable, safe. Let me take you there. You can get a proper meal, a good night's rest, and tomorrow we can figure out what comes next." Hannah lowered her hands and looked up at him, searching his face for any hint of ulterior motive. Back in Boston, she'd learned to read men's faces, to spot the ones who saw a lone woman as an opportunity to be exploited. But Colton Sullivan's blue eyes held only a weary kindness, the look of a man who'd known loss himself and recognized it in others. "Why would you help me?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "You don't know me." "No, ma'am, I don't. But James did. He chose you, wrote to you, waited for you. That means something." Colton turned his hat in his hands, his calloused fingers tracing the brim. "And my mother, God rest her soul, she raised me to know that you don't leave a woman stranded in a strange town with nowhere to go. That's not how decent people behave." The simple, straightforward decency of it broke something in Hannah. The tears she'd been fighting spilled over, hot tracks down her dusty cheeks. She wiped at them hastily, embarrassed by this display of weakness in front of strangers. "I apologize," she said, her voice catching. "I'm not usually so— I've just had rather a difficult day." "I'd say that's putting it mildly, miss." Jed, the station master, spoke up from his corner, his voice gruff with sympathy. Colton's right. Sarah Sullivan's place is good and proper. You'll be safe there. Hannah drew a shaky breath and nodded. What choice did she have, really? She couldn't stay in the station office all night, and she certainly couldn't afford one of the town's hotels, assuming they'd even take a woman alone. Thank you, she said, rising on unsteady legs. I'm grateful for your kindness, Mr. Sullivan. Just Colton, please. He picked up her satchel with one hand. It looked light as a feather in his work-hardened grip, and gestured toward the door with the other. My wagon's just outside. It's not fancy, but it'll get us there. As Hannah followed him out into the gathering darkness, she cast one last look at the empty station platform where she'd expected to begin her new life. Instead, she was following a stranger to an uncertain future, her carefully laid plans in ruins. The evening air bit with the promise of winter. Hannah pulled her thin coat tighter, wishing she'd had the money for something warmer before leaving Boston. Colton's wagon was indeed plain, a working vehicle, not meant for comfort, with a wooden seat and a bed full of supplies covered by a tarp. He helped her up onto the seat with an easy strength, his hand warm and steady through her glove. Then he walked around and swung up beside her, taking the reins with practiced ease. Silvage isn't much to look at, he said as he clicked to the horses, but the people are mostly decent. Sarah will take good care of you tonight. They rode in silence down the main street of Silvage, and Hannah took in her surroundings with a kind of numb detachment. The town was small and rough, the buildings mostly false-fronted wooden structures that looked barely substantial enough to withstand the harsh prairie winds. A general store, its windows dark now. A saloon. The Silver Star, she realized with a cold jolt, the place where James Blackwell had died, with light and noise spilling from its doors. A bank, a livery stable, a few other establishments she couldn't make out in the darkness. And people. Men mostly, standing in doorways or walking the muddy street, who turned to watch as Colton's wagon passed. Their eyes lingered on Hannah with open curiosity and something else. Speculation, perhaps. News traveled fast in a small town, and she had no doubt they all knew who she was and why she'd come. The mail-order bride who'd arrived too late. The thought made her cheeks burn with humiliation. She stared straight ahead, refusing to meet their curious gazes. Don't mind them, Colton said quietly, as if reading her thoughts. Small town, not much happens. You're just novelty. Give them something else to gossip about, and they'll forget all about you. Hannah wasn't sure whether that was meant to be comforting or not. They turned off the main street onto a quieter lane and pulled up in front of a two-story house that looked marginally more substantial than most of the buildings in town. Warm light glowed in the windows, and a neatly painted sign by the door read, Sullivan's Boarding House, respectable lodging for respectable folk. Before Colton could help her down, the front door flew open and a woman emerged, backlit by the interior lamps. She was perhaps 30, with dark hair pulled back in a practical bun, and a face that shared Colton's strong features, but was softened by femininity and an air of capable warmth. Colton Sullivan, is that you finally? I was starting to worry you'd... She stopped mid-sentence as she caught sight of Hannah. Her eyes widened with understanding. Oh, you poor dear. You're her, aren't you? James's bride? Sarah, this is Miss Hannah Campbell. Colton had come around the wagon and was helping Hannah down, her legs stiff and unsteady from the long day's travel. She just arrived on the evening train. She doesn't know anyone in town, and I thought maybe you'd have a room available for her. Available? Of course I have a room available. Sarah came down the porch steps with a swish of practical calico skirts. Up close, Hannah could see she had the same striking blue eyes as her brother, but where his were guarded and careful, hers were warm with immediate sympathy. You poor thing, you look absolutely done in. Come inside right now, both of you. I've got stew on the stove and fresh bread, and Miss Campbell, you look like you haven't had a decent meal in days. I couldn't impose, Hannah began, but Sarah cut her off with a firm but kind tone. Nonsense, you're not imposing, you're accepting help, which is what any sensible person does when they need it. Now come along before you catch your death in this cold. Hannah found herself being gently but inexorably shepherded up the porch steps and into the boarding house. The interior was simple but spotlessly clean, with worn but comfortable-looking furniture and lamps that cast a warm, golden glow. The smell of beef stew and fresh bread made Hannah's stomach clench with sudden, fierce hunger. "Sit down right there," Sarah commanded, pointing to a chair by a pot-bellied stove that radiated blessed warmth. "Colton, make yourself useful and get Miss Campbell some water. I'll fix her a bowl of stew." Hannah sank into the chair, too exhausted to protest further. The warmth from the stove seeped into her bones, and she realized she was shaking, not from cold now, but from the accumulated shock and strain of the day. Colton appeared with a tin cup of water, which Hannah accepted gratefully. Their fingers brushed briefly, and she was struck again by how warm and steady his hand was, calloused from hard work, but somehow comforting in its solidness. "Thank you," she murmured. He nodded and moved away, giving her space while still remaining nearby. Sarah bustled about with efficient energy, ladling stew into a bowl and cutting thick slices from a loaf of bread that looked fresh from the oven. "Here now, eat this," Sarah said, pressing the bowl and bread into Hannah's hands. "Don't worry about manners or making conversation. Just eat." The stew was rich and savory, thick with beef and vegetables, and the bread was soft and warm. Hannah ate mechanically at first, then with increasing hunger as her body reminded her that she'd barely eaten in 2 days. Sarah and Colton let her eat in peace, speaking quietly to each other across the room. "Rode out to the ranch today to check on things," Colton was saying. "Stock looks good, but the place is going to need someone to manage it soon. James's cousin back east is the next of kin, but word is he doesn't want to leave Philadelphia." "What'll happen to it?" Sarah asked. "Probably go up for sale. It's a good property. Someone will want it." Hannah finished the stew and set down the bowl, feeling marginally more human. Sarah immediately appeared with a cup of hot tea, pressing it into Hannah's hands. "Now then," Sarah said, pulling up a chair and sitting down across from Hannah, with the air of a woman ready to tackle problems head-on. "Let's talk practical matters. You've had a terrible shock, and you're going to need time to figure out what comes next. You're welcome to stay here for as long as you need. I charge $2 a week for room and board, meals included, but—" $2, Hannah echoed faintly. Even that modest sum would exhaust her meager savings in less than 2 months. "But," Sarah continued firmly, "we can work something out. If you're willing to help around the boarding house, cooking, cleaning, that sort of thing, I can reduce the rate considerably. I could use the help anyway." It was charity, kindly offered, but Hannah felt what remained of her pride rebel against it. She'd worked for everything she'd had in Boston, asked no one for handouts. But what choice did she have now? "That's very kind," she said carefully. "But I can't take advantage—" "You're not taking advantage of anything," Colton spoke up from where he stood by the stove, his arms crossed over his broad chest. "Sarah's offering you work for room and board. That's not charity, that's employment." "Exactly right," Sarah agreed. "And heaven knows I need the help. This place doesn't run itself, and I've been doing it alone since our parents died. Another pair of capable hands would be a blessing." Hannah looked between them, these kind strangers who were offering her a lifeline when they owed her nothing. Her throat tightened again with tears that she absolutely refused to shed. She'd already shown enough weakness for one day. "Then I accept," she said, her voice steady despite everything. "And I promise you won't regret it. I'm a hard worker." "I don't doubt that for a moment," Sarah said warmly. "Any woman brave enough to travel 3,000 miles alone to start a new life has backbone." "Brave or foolish?" Hannah said with a bitter twist to her lips. "I'm not sure which." "Brave," Colton said firmly. "Definitely brave." Their eyes met across the room, and something passed between them, a moment of understanding, of shared recognition. Colton Sullivan had known loss. She could see it in the set of his shoulders, in the way grief had carved lines around his eyes and mouth. He understood what it felt like to have the world shift beneath your feet, leaving you struggling for purchase on unfamiliar ground. "Well then, that's settled." Sarah stood briskly, ever practical. "Let me show you to your room, Miss Campbell. You need a good night's sleep. Everything looks better in the morning." Hannah doubted that anything would look better in the morning, but she followed Sarah up a narrow staircase to the second floor. The boarding house had 6 rooms, Sarah explained, 4 currently occupied by working men. All respectable, all keep to themselves. One that was Sarah's, and one that would now be Hannah's. "It's small but clean," Sarah said, opening a door at the end of the hall. I change the linens weekly, and there's fresh water in the pitcher. The privy is out back, and there's a washroom downstairs if you want a proper bath. I can heat water for you in the morning." The room was indeed small, barely large enough for the narrow bed, a washstand, and a simple wooden chair. But it was spotlessly clean, the bed made up with crisp white sheets, and a faded quilt in a wedding ring pattern lay folded at the foot. A single window looked out over the dark prairie. "It's perfect," Hannah said, and meant it. After the crowded, noisy room she'd shared in Boston, this simple space felt like a palace. "Thank you, Miss Sullivan. Truly." "Just Sarah, please. We'll be working together after all. No need for formality." Sarah squeezed Hannah's shoulder gently. "Get some rest now. We'll talk more in the morning about what needs doing around here." When Sarah had gone, Hannah sank onto the edge of the bed and finally allowed herself to simply sit in silence. The events of the day crashed over her in waves. The terrible announcement at the station, Colton Sullivan's unexpected kindness, this small safe room where she could rest. James Blackwell was dead. She was alone in a strange town, 3,000 miles from everything she'd known. And yet, she was here. She'd survived the journey, survived the devastating news, survived her first evening in Silvage. That was something, wasn't it? A foundation, however shaky, on which to build whatever came next. Hannah changed into her nightgown, the only other garment in her satchel besides the dress she'd worn, and braided her hair. She washed her face in the basin, watching the water turn gray with the dust and grime of travel. In the small mirror above the washstand, her reflection looked back at her, a woman of 24 with auburn hair, gray eyes, and a face that was pleasant enough but unremarkable. A woman who'd gambled everything on a stranger's promise and lost. "But I'm still here," she thought. "I'm still standing." It wasn't much, but it was something. She slipped between the cool sheets and blew out the lamp, plunging the room into darkness. Through the thin walls, she could hear the murmur of voices. Sarah and Colton still talking downstairs. She wondered what they were saying about her, this unexpected complication that had arrived on the evening train. Despite her exhaustion, sleep eluded her. Hannah lay in the darkness, her mind racing. What would she do? How long could she stay here, imposing on Sarah's kindness? And then what? Save enough money to go where? Back to Boston? She couldn't face that, returning to the mill and the grinding poverty she'd barely escaped. West to California? With what money? The questions circled endlessly, offering no answers. Somewhere in the small hours of the morning, exhaustion finally claimed her, pulling her down into a restless sleep haunted by dreams of trains that never arrived and strangers' faces she couldn't quite see. She woke to early morning light streaming through the window and the smell of coffee and frying bacon drifting up from below. For a moment she was disoriented, unable to remember where she was. Then memory came crashing back. Silvage. James Blackwell. Dead. Hannah dressed quickly in her same travel-worn dress. She'd need to wash it soon. It was the only one she had. And splashed water on her face. Her reflection in the morning light looked haggard, dark circles under her eyes and her skin pale. She pinched her cheeks to bring some color to them, tied her hair back in a simple knot, and went downstairs. The boarding house's main room served as both parlor and dining area. A long table dominated the space, and Sarah was setting out plates and cutlery with practiced efficiency. She looked up as Hannah appeared and smiled warmly. "Good morning. I was just about to come wake you. Coffee?" "Please," Hannah said gratefully. She poured herself a cup from the pot on the stove and took a seat at the table. The coffee was strong and hot, exactly what she needed. Through the window she could see Silvage coming to life in the morning light. Men heading to work, a woman with a basket hurrying toward what was probably the general store, a dog nosing through the muddy street. "The boarders have already eaten and gone to work," Sarah explained as she set plates of eggs, bacon, and thick slices of fried bread on the table. "They're early risers, most of them, but I always keep some warm for latecomers. Sit, eat." Hannah obeyed, finding that despite everything, she was hungry. The food was simple but good, and she ate steadily while Sarah bustled about, washing dishes and tidying up. "So," Sarah said eventually, settling into a chair across from Hannah with her own cup of coffee, "we should talk about what happens next." Hannah set down her fork and met Sarah's eyes. "I need work. Real work with real wages. I can cook, clean, sew, do laundry, anything honest. I worked in a textile mill back in Boston, so I'm used to long hours and hard work. Well, you're in luck then, because I genuinely do need help here. I've been managing alone, but it's exhausting. If you're willing to help with cooking, cleaning, washing linens, and general upkeep, I can offer you room and board plus $3 a week. That's fair wages for the work involved. $3 a week. It wasn't much, but it was honest pay for honest work. Hannah could save it, slowly building a small cushion against whatever the future held. That's more than fair, Hannah said. When do I start? Sarah laughed. How about after breakfast? No time like the present, I always say. They were clearing away the breakfast dishes when a knock came at the door. Sarah went to answer it, and Hannah heard a man's voice, familiar, low and rough-edged. Colton. Morning, Sarah. Wanted to check on Miss Campbell, see how she's settling in. She's doing just fine. Come in, Colton. We're just finishing up breakfast. Colton stepped into the main room, removing his hat. He looked tired, Hannah thought, like he hadn't slept well either. His dark hair was damp, as if he'd just washed, and he wore the same practical work clothes as yesterday, clean but well worn. Morning, Miss Campbell, he said, nodding to her. You get any rest? Some, Hannah replied. Thank you for everything yesterday. Your kindness meant more than I can say. Just doing what anyone would do. But his eyes held something warmer than his modest words suggested. Listen, I was wondering if you might want to ride out to James's place today. His ranch, I mean. It's about 3 miles outside town. I need to check on the stock, and I thought you might want to see the place, the life he was offering you. Hannah's first instinct was to refuse. What good would it do to see what might have been? But then something stubborn in her reconsidered. She'd come all this way. She deserved to see what James Blackwell's promise had really meant. Yes, she heard herself say. I'd like that. Colton nodded, as if he'd expected this answer. I'll come back for you in an hour, if that suits. Give you time to finish up here. After he'd gone, Sarah gave Hannah a considering look. Colton's a good man. One of the best I know, actually, though he's had his share of hard times. What happened? Hannah asked, unable to help her curiosity. Lost his wife and baby daughter 3 years ago. Typhoid fever, same epidemic that took our parents. Nearly destroyed him. Sarah's voice was soft with old grief. He and James Blackwell, they helped each other through the worst of it. James had lost his own wife the year before in childbirth. They understood each other's grief. So much loss, Hannah thought. This harsh land seemed to demand terrible prices from those who tried to make a life here. True to his word, Colton returned an hour later with his wagon. Hannah had changed into the only other dress she owned, a simple gray cotton that had seen better days but was at least clean. She'd pinned up her hair more neatly and tried to make herself presentable, though she wasn't entirely sure why it mattered. The ride out of town took them onto the open prairie, and Hannah got her first real look at the Colorado Territory by daylight. The land stretched endlessly in all directions, rolling hills covered in tough prairie grass that had turned golden with the approaching winter. In the distance, mountains rose purple against a sky so blue it almost hurt to look at. The air was thin and cold, carrying the scent of sage and dust. It's so vast, Hannah said, overwhelmed by the sheer scale of the landscape. That it is, Colton agreed. Overwhelming at first, especially if you're used to cities, but you get accustomed to it. Start to need all this space around you. I can't imagine feeling that way. Give it time. They rode in companionable silence for a while. Hannah found herself relaxing slightly in Colton's presence. He didn't push for conversation, didn't ask uncomfortable questions about her feelings or her plans. He simply drove the wagon with steady competence, occasionally pointing out a landmark or a distant building. That's the Henderson place, he said, gesturing to a distant ranch house. And over that ridge is the Bartlett spread, James's property. Well, it's just ahead now. They crested a low rise, and Hannah saw it. A modest ranch house of weathered wood, with a barn and several outbuildings, surrounded by rough-fenced pastures where cattle grazed. It was simple, practical, and solid. The home of a working rancher, not a rich man, but a man who'd built something real with his own hands. He built most of it himself, Colton said quietly as they approached. The house, the barn, Took him 5 years of hard work. He was proud of it. He pulled the wagon to a stop in front of the house, and they sat for a moment in silence. Hannah stared at the building, trying to imagine the man who'd built it, who'd written to her in his careful, formal way, who'd hoped she might help him turn this house into a home. A man she'd never know now. "Would you like to see inside?" Colton asked gently. Hannah nodded, not trusting her voice. The house was unlocked. "No one locks their doors out here," Colton explained, and they stepped into the dim interior. It smelled of dust and abandonment, though James had been gone only days. The main room served as kitchen and living area combined, with a cast-iron stove, a rough-hewn table, and a few simple chairs. Everything was neat and orderly. The possessions of a man who lived alone and took care of his own space. "2 bedrooms," Colton said, gesturing to doors on either side of the main room. His and one he was fixing up for, well, for you, I suppose. Hannah moved through the house slowly, taking it all in. The bedroom James had prepared for her held a bed frame, a washstand, and a chest of drawers. Simple curtains hung at the window, the fabric new and still crisp. On the dresser sat a small vase, empty, but clearly chosen with care. He'd been preparing for her arrival, making the house ready, hoping. The full weight of the tragedy hit Hannah then, standing in that simple room. James Blackwell had been a real person, not just words on paper. He'd built this house, raised cattle, prepared a room for a bride he'd never met. He'd written careful letters and made promises he'd fully intended to keep. And then some drunk fool in a saloon had ended it all in a moment of senseless violence. It wasn't fair. But then Hannah was learning that fairness had nothing to do with how the world actually worked. "You all right?" Colton's voice came from the doorway, quiet and concerned. "I'm fine," Hannah said, though her voice wavered. "It's just, this was going to be my room, my home." "I know." She turned to face him. "Did you know him well, James?" "Well, as any man knows another, I suppose. He was a good man, honest, hardworking, fair in his dealings, quiet, kept to himself mostly, but he'd help a neighbor without being asked. After my wife and daughter died, he came by every day for a month, just to make sure I was eating, keeping the place running." Colton's jaw tightened with memory. "I owed him a debt I can never repay now." "He sounds like someone worth knowing." "He was. And he chose you, Miss Campbell. Out of all the women who might have answered his advertisement, he chose you. That tells me something about your character." Hannah wasn't sure what to say to that, so she said nothing. They went back outside, where Colton checked on the cattle and the condition of the buildings, while Hannah stood in the yard, looking out over the land James Blackwell had worked. The wind tugged at her hair and skirts, cold and relentless. In Boston, she'd been sheltered from weather by tall buildings and crowded streets. Here, there was nothing to block the wind's assault. This land, beautiful as it was, would be harsh and unforgiving. It would take strength to build a life here. Had she possessed that strength? She supposed she'd never know now. "Miss Campbell," Colton called from near the barn. "Come see this." She walked over to find him standing beside a large oak tree near the house. Someone had built a bench beneath it, rough but solid, positioned to catch the afternoon sun. "James built this last month," Colton said. "Told me he wanted a place where his future wife could sit in the evenings, watch the sunset. He said every woman should have a peaceful spot of her own." The thoughtfulness of it broke Hannah's carefully maintained composure. She pressed her hand to her mouth, fighting tears, but they came anyway, silent, aching tears for a man she'd never known, for a future that would never be, for all the might-have-beens that would remain forever unanswered. Colton didn't try to stop her tears or offer empty platitudes. He simply stood nearby, solid and steady, giving her the space to grieve while making sure she wasn't alone. When the tears finally subsided, Hannah wiped her eyes with shaking hands. "I'm sorry, I don't usually—" "Don't apologize for tears, Miss Campbell. Lord knows this situation has earned them." They stood together in silence for a long moment, the wind rustling through the prairie grass, a hawk circling high overhead. "What'll happen to this place?" Hannah finally asked. "Like I told Sarah, it'll probably go up for sale. James's cousin back east is the heir, but he's got no interest in ranching. Someone will buy it. It's good land, decent house, healthy stock." Someone else will make a life here. That's how it goes. The ride back to town was quiet, both of them lost in their own thoughts. When they reached Sarah's boarding house, Colton helped Hannah down from the wagon. "Thank you for taking me out there," she said. "It helped, I think, to see it, to know what it was he was offering." "You're welcome." Colton hesitated, then added, "Miss Campbell, I know you're still figuring out what comes next, and that's natural, but I want you to know you're not alone in this town. Sarah and I will help however we can. You've got friends here, even if you didn't know it yesterday." The simple kindness of it tightened Hannah's throat again, but she managed a genuine smile. "Thank you, Colton. That means more than you know." As she watched him drive away, Hannah realized something had shifted inside her. Yesterday, standing on the station platform with her shattered dreams around her feet, she'd felt utterly defeated, as if her life had ended along with James Blackwell's. But today, having seen the ranch he'd built, having accepted Sarah's offer of work and Colton's offer of friendship, she felt something different stirring. Not hope, exactly. That was too strong a word yet. But maybe possibility. She'd survived the worst day. She had a place to sleep, work to do, and people who'd shown her kindness when they owed her nothing. It wasn't the future she'd planned, but it was a foundation. And foundations, Hannah thought as she climbed the boarding house steps, were where you started to build. The days that followed settled into a rhythm that Hannah found unexpectedly comforting. She rose each morning before dawn, helping Sarah prepare breakfast for the boarders. 5 men who worked various jobs around Silvage and kept to themselves with the quiet courtesy of those who understood the value of a clean, well-run establishment. After the men left for their work, Hannah and Sarah would tackle the day's tasks together, washing dishes, scrubbing floors, changing linens, preparing the midday and evening meals. It was hard work, the kind that left Hannah's back aching and her hands raw despite the lard Sarah insisted she rub into them each night. But it was honest work, and there was satisfaction in seeing a room transformed from disorder to cleanliness, in watching bread rise golden in the oven, in knowing she was earning her keep rather than accepting charity. Sarah proved to be excellent company, practical, warm-hearted, and possessed of a dry wit that often caught Hannah by surprise. She'd been running the boarding house for 3 years, ever since the typhoid epidemic had taken both their parents within a week of each other. "Colton wanted me to move out to his ranch," Sarah confided one morning as they hung laundry on the line behind the house, their breath misting in the cold air. "Said I shouldn't be running a business alone in town, that it wasn't proper for a woman. But I told him I'd go mad out there with nothing but cattle and prairie for company. At least here I have people around, work that keeps me busy." "It must have been hard, though," Hannah said, pinning one of the boarder's shirts to the line. "Losing your parents and then managing all this alone. Hard doesn't begin to cover it. But you do what needs doing, don't you? That's what Mama always said. You put one foot in front of the other and you keep walking, even when you can't see where the path leads." Sarah's hand stilled on the sheet she was hanging, her expression distant. "I suspect you understand that better than most, Hannah." Hannah did understand. She'd been putting one foot in front of the other since her parents died, through her brother's death, through the grinding years at the mill, through the long journey west, and through the devastating news that had greeted her at the station. Keep walking, keep moving, because the alternative was to lie down and let the world roll over you. "I do," she said simply. They worked in companionable silence for a while, the autumn sun weak but welcome on their faces. Around them, Silvage went about its daily business, the ring of the blacksmith's hammer from the livery, the rattle of wagons on the main street, the distant lowing of cattle being driven somewhere. "Colton's been asking about you," Sarah said casually, though Hannah detected a note of careful interest in her voice. "Has he?" Hannah tried to keep her own tone neutral, though she felt a flutter of something in her chest. Curiosity, perhaps? Or maybe just gratitude for his continued kindness. Stops by every few days on some pretext or other, needs to borrow sugar, wants to check if I need anything from the general store, happened to be passing and thought he'd say hello." Sarah's lips quirked in a knowing smile. "My brother's never been particularly subtle." Hannah felt heat rise in her cheeks. "I'm sure he's just being neighborly. He was James's friend, and he probably feels some obligation to, "Oh, he does feel an obligation," Sarah interrupted, "but not the kind you're thinking. Colton Sullivan doesn't do anything out of mere duty. If he's checking on you, it's because he wants to, not because he has to. Before Hannah could formulate a response to that, the back door opened and one of the boarders, Mr. Peterson, a clerk at the bank, poked his head out. "Pardon the interruption, Miss Sullivan, but there's someone here to see Miss Campbell." Hannah's heart jumped inexplicably. She exchanged a quick glance with Sarah, then hurried inside, smoothing down her apron and tucking a stray lock of hair behind her ear. In the boarding house's main room stood Colton, hat in hand, looking slightly uncomfortable in the domestic space. His eyes found Hannah immediately, and something in his expression eased. "Miss Campbell, I hope I'm not disturbing your work."
"Not at all," Hannah said, very aware of Sarah hovering in the doorway behind her, making no pretense of not listening. "Is everything all right?" "Yes, fine. I was in town anyway, and I thought—" He trailed off, then seemed to gather himself. "I wondered if you might have time this afternoon to take a ride with me. There's something I'd like to discuss with you. A proposition of sorts." Sarah made a small, quickly stifled sound that might have been a laugh. Hannah shot her a quelling look before turning back to Colton. "A proposition?" "A business proposition," Colton clarified quickly, a faint flush creeping up his neck. "About employment. Paid employment," he added, as if worried she might think otherwise. Hannah's curiosity was thoroughly piqued now. "I suppose I could spare an hour or two this afternoon, Sarah?" "Oh, go on," Sarah said with an airy wave of her hand. "I can manage for a few hours. Heaven knows you've been working hard enough. You deserve a break."
And so, an hour later, Hannah found herself once again sitting beside Colton in his wagon as they headed out of town. She'd changed into her better dress, the navy blue she'd worn when she arrived, and pinned her hair up more carefully than usual, telling herself it was simply about being presentable for a business discussion. The late October afternoon was crisp and clear, the sky that impossible blue she was beginning to associate with Colorado. The prairie grass rippled like water in the breeze, and in the distance the mountains stood sentinel against the horizon. "You're probably wondering what this is about," Colton said after they'd driven for a few minutes in silence. "The thought had crossed my mind," Hannah admitted. He was quiet for a moment, as if choosing his words carefully. "You know, I have a ranch about 5 miles out of town. Sullivan's Reach, I call it. It's not as big as some spreads around here, but it's a good operation. About 300 head of cattle, decent grazing land, a solid house." Hannah nodded, wondering where this was leading. "The thing is," Colton continued, "I'm running the place alone. After my wife died, I let the help go. Couldn't afford to keep paying wages when I was barely keeping myself together. But I'm managing better now, and the ranch is growing. I need help, but not the kind most ranchers need." "What kind do you need?" "A housekeeper. Someone to manage the domestic side of things. Cooking, cleaning, keeping the accounts and paperwork organized. I'm a fair hand with cattle and building and fixing, but the house is a disaster. I can barely cook more than bacon and beans, and my record keeping is a mess." He glanced at her, his blue eyes serious. "I'm offering you a job, Miss Campbell. Real employment with fair wages, room and board, and your own quarters separate from the main house. Everything proper and respectable." Hannah stared at him, her mind racing. Leave the boarding house? Move to a remote ranch with a man she barely knew? "I can see you're hesitant," Colton said. "And that's smart. You should be cautious. So here's what I'm proposing. Give it a month. Come work at the ranch for 30 days, and if you don't like it, if it doesn't suit you, I'll pay your wages and your train fare to wherever you want to go. You'll have earned enough to give you real options." "What would the wages be?" Hannah asked, trying to keep her voice businesslike despite the way her heart was hammering. $15 a month, plus room and board. That's fair for a live-in housekeeper in these parts." $15. More than she'd ever earned in Boston. More than the $3 a week Sarah was paying her. In a few months, she could save enough to truly choose her future rather than simply surviving day to day. "Why me?" Hannah asked. "You could hire anyone in town." Colton was quiet for a moment, guiding the horses around a rough patch in the trail. "Because you need the work, and I need the help. Because I know you're a hard worker. Sarah's told me how much you've been doing at the boarding house. And because—" He paused, then continued more quietly. "Because James trusted you enough to ask you to share his life. That tells me you're someone worth trusting." The mention of James sent a pang through Hannah's chest. She'd been in Silvage almost 2 weeks now, and the sharp edge of that initial grief had dulled to a persistent ache. She'd visited his grave once, a simple marker on the hill behind the church, and left wildflowers she'd gathered from the prairie. "I'd need to think about it," Hannah said finally, "and talk to Sarah. She's counting on my help at the boarding house." "Of course, take all the time you need." Colton pulled the wagon to a stop at a spot where the land rose slightly, offering a view across the rolling prairie.
Bum!
But while you're thinking, maybe you should see the place. Sullivan's Reach is just over that ridge. They drove on, cresting the rise, and Hannah caught her first glimpse of Colton's ranch. It was larger than James's had been, a sturdy 2-story house painted white with a wide porch wrapped around the front. A substantial barn, several outbuildings, and well-maintained fencing spoke of a prosperous operation. Cattle grazed peacefully in the near pastures, their coats glossy in the afternoon sun. "You built all this?" Hannah asked, genuinely impressed. "Most of it. My father started the ranch, and when he died, it came to me. I've been building it up ever since." There was quiet pride in his voice, the satisfaction of a man who'd created something solid and lasting with his own hands. As they approached the house, Hannah noticed details that suggested a woman's long absence: peeling paint around the windows, a flower bed choked with weeds, curtains hanging crooked in the windows. The porch, while structurally sound, was dusty and cluttered with various tools and equipment. Colton seemed to read her thoughts. "Like I said, the house needs work. I've been focusing on the operation itself, the stock, the land, the barn, and outbuildings. The house, well, it's just me, so I haven't paid it much mind." He helped her down from the wagon, and Hannah was again struck by how solid and warm his hand felt, how easily he steadied her. She pulled her shawl tighter against the afternoon chill and followed him up onto the porch. "The door sticks a bit," Colton said, shouldering it open. "I keep meaning to plane it down." The interior of the house was dim, the curtains drawn against the sun. As Colton moved through the main room opening curtains and lighting lamps, Hannah took in her surroundings with growing dismay. The man hadn't been exaggerating about the state of things. The front room, which should have been a welcoming parlor, was cluttered with papers, tools, spare tack, and various items that seemed to have been set down and forgotten. A thick layer of dust covered every surface, and cobwebs draped the corners. The kitchen was worse, dishes piled in a dry sink, the stove crusted with burnt-on food, the floor gritty beneath her feet. "I know it's bad," Colton said, sounding almost apologetic. "I warned you." "It's not bad," Hannah said automatically, then caught herself. "All right, it's terrible, but it's nothing that soap, water, and hard work can't fix." She moved through the downstairs, her practical mind already cataloging what needed doing. The house itself was well-built and spacious. A large front room that could be a proper parlor, a generous kitchen with a good stove and plenty of workspace, a small office or library off to one side, and what looked like a mudroom at the back. "Upstairs is 3 bedrooms, Colton explained, following as she explored. "My room, a guest room that hasn't been used in years, and—" Paused at the base of the stairs, his expression tightening. "And the room that was my daughter's. I don't go in there much." Hannah heard the grief beneath the carefully neutral words. Sarah had told her about Colton's loss, his wife and baby daughter taken by typhoid fever. 3 years wasn't so long when you were mourning a child. "You don't have to show me," she said gently. "No, it's all right. If you're going to work here, you should see the whole house." He led her upstairs, pointing out his bedroom. She carefully didn't look inside, feeling it was too intimate, and the guest room, which was dusty but relatively tidy. Then he stopped before a closed door at the end of the hall. This was Grace's room. She was only 2 when— His voice caught, and he cleared his throat roughly. "My wife Emma kept it just so. I haven't changed anything." Hannah wanted to tell him he didn't have to open that door, but he was already turning the handle, pushing it open to reveal a small, bright room. A child's room, frozen in time. A tiny bed with a faded quilt, a rocking chair by the window, a shelf with a few simple toys. Dust motes danced in the afternoon sunlight streaming through the clean windows. The windows were clean, Hannah noticed. This room alone showed signs of careful maintenance, as if Colton couldn't bear to let his daughter's space fall into neglect,
even as the rest of the house crumbled around him. She loved that rocking horse, Colton said, nodding toward a small painted horse in the corner. My father made it for her. She'd ride it for hours, singing to herself. Hannah's throat tightened with sympathy. She must have been precious. She was everything. The words were simple, stark, and filled with such profound loss that Hannah had to look away, giving him privacy for his grief. They stood in silence for a moment, then Colton gently closed the door. The guest room would be yours if you took the job. It has its own space, and I'd respect your privacy. The door has a good lock, if that's a concern. I appreciate that, Hannah said, though in truth she wasn't worried about her safety. Something about Colton Sullivan inspired trust, despite how little she actually knew him. Perhaps it was the way he spoke to her directly, treating her as an equal rather than a woman to be managed or an object to be protected. Or perhaps it was simply the fundamental decency she sensed in him, the same decency that had made him step forward at the train station when a stranger needed help. They went back downstairs and Colton showed her the office, a small room lined with shelves that held a chaotic jumble of papers, ledgers, and books. This is where I try to keep track of the ranch's business, he said with a rueful smile. Try being the operative word. I can manage cattle and land, but paperwork defeats me. I've got receipts from 2 years ago mixed up with current bills, and I'm pretty sure I've lost track of who owes me money and who I owe. Hannah moved to the desk, unable to help herself. She picked up a stack of papers, shuffling through them, bills of sale, receipts, correspondence, all jumbled together with no apparent system. This is chaos, she said. I know. No, I mean, this is actual chaos. How do you function? Not well, Colton admitted. I've probably lost money because I couldn't find the right paperwork when I needed it, and I know I'm late paying some suppliers because I can't find their invoices. Hannah set down the papers and turned to face him, her decision crystallizing. If I took this position, and I'm not saying I am, but if I did, I'd need complete control over the household and the paperwork. I can't work effectively if you're going to second-guess every decision. You'd have it, Colton said immediately. The house and the office would be your domain. I'd stay out of your way. And the arrangement would be entirely professional. I'd be an employee, not... She trailed off, not quite sure how to articulate what she meant. Not a companion, not a substitute wife. Not a woman being slowly courted under the guise of employment. Not anything but an employee, Colton finished for her. I give you my word on that, Miss Campbell. This is a business arrangement, pure and simple. I need help. You need work. That's all. Hannah studied his face, searching for any hint of deception or hidden agenda. But his blue eyes met hers steadily, honest and clear. I'll need to discuss it with Sarah, she said, and I'd want to start with just the 1-month trial, like you suggested. If it doesn't work out for either of us, I need to know I can leave without hard feelings. Agreed. Colton extended his hand. Is that a yes, then? Hannah looked at his outstretched hand, calloused and scarred from hard work, steady and honest. She thought about the cramped room at the boarding house, the $3 a week she was earning, the limited future that path offered. Then she thought about this ranch, this house that needed her, this man who was offering her real wages and real opportunity. She'd taken one enormous gamble when she'd answered James Blackwell's advertisement. That gamble had failed through no fault of her own. But maybe, just maybe, she had one more gamble in her. Hannah placed her hand in Colton's, feeling the warmth and strength of his grip. Yes, I'll give it a month. The smile that broke across Colton's face transformed him, erasing years of grief and hardship and revealing the younger, lighter man he must have once been. You won't regret it, Miss Campbell. I promise you that. Hannah hoped he was right. The ride back to town was filled with practical details. When she could start, what she should bring, what supplies she'd need. Colton was clearly relieved to have the decision made, and he talked more freely than Hannah had heard him before, describing the ranch's operations and his hopes for its future. I'm planning to expand the herd next spring, he said. Maybe add another 100 head if the grazing holds up. And I've been thinking about getting some chickens, maybe a milk cow. Haven't had fresh eggs or milk in 3 years. Chickens and a cow would be good, Hannah agreed. And a kitchen garden, come spring. You can't live on bacon and beans alone. See, that's exactly the kind of thinking I need. I focus on the cattle and forget about everything else. When they reached the boarding house, Colton helped Hannah down from the wagon. When can you start? Give me 3 days to help Sarah find someone to replace me. It's not fair to leave her in the lurch.
3 days then.
I'll come fetch you on Monday morning, if that suits.
Monday morning, Hannah confirmed. She watched him drive away, then turned to find Sarah standing in the doorway, arms crossed and a knowing smile on her face. So, Sarah said, my brother made you an offer. A business offer, Hannah emphasized, following Sarah inside. Business. Sarah's tone suggested she was deeply skeptical of that characterization. It is business. He needs a housekeeper, and I need better wages than I can earn here. That's all. If you say so. Sarah moved to the kitchen and began preparing tea, her movements brisk and practiced. Though I'll point out that Colton hasn't shown the slightest interest in hiring help for 3 years, and then you arrive in town and suddenly he desperately needs a housekeeper. The house is in terrible condition, Hannah protested. He genuinely does need help. Oh, I don't doubt that.
Sullivan's Reach has been falling apart since Emma died. I've been telling him for years to hire someone, but he always refused. Until now. Sarah set 2 cups on the table and poured the tea, her expression softening. I'm not teasing you to be mean, Hannah. Colton's my brother, and I love him. Watching him these past 3 years has been like watching someone slowly drown. He goes through the motions, keeps the ranch running, but there's been no life in him, no joy. Until recently. Recently? Hannah's heart beat a little faster. Since you arrived, actually. I've seen him smile more in the past 2 weeks than in the past 3 years. Sarah reached across the table and squeezed Hannah's hand. So whether this is purely business or something more, I'm glad. He needs someone to remind him that life is worth living. And I think maybe you need that too. Hannah wanted to protest, to insist again that this was simply employment, nothing more. But something stopped her. The memory of Colton's smile when she'd agreed to work for him, the way her heart had jumped when Mr. Peterson announced she had a visitor, the strange comfort she felt in Colton's presence. I barely know him, she said instead. That can change, if you want it to. Did she want it to? Hannah wasn't sure. James Blackwell had been a stranger too, and she'd been prepared to marry him based on nothing more than letters and hope. But that had been different. A practical arrangement, a solution to mutual needs. This felt different somehow, more complicated and uncertain. I should focus on the work, Hannah said finally. The rest? Well, we'll see, Sarah smiled. Fair enough. Now let's talk about finding someone to help me around here. I know a few women in town who might be interested. The next 3 days passed in a blur of activity. Sarah did indeed find someone to help at the boarding house, a widow named Mrs. Fletcher who'd been looking for work and living situations. Hannah spent time showing her the routines, introducing her to the boarders, explaining Sarah's preferences for how things should be done. She also made a trip to the general store, using some of her carefully hoarded savings to purchase a few items she'd need at the ranch. A sturdy work apron, some basic sewing supplies, a new bar of lye soap. The store owner, a shrewd-eyed man named Mr. Peterson, regarded her with open curiosity. Heard you're going to work out at Sullivan's Reach, he said as he wrapped her purchases. News traveled fast in small towns, apparently. That's right. Good man, Colton Sullivan. Had a rough time of it, but he's steady, honest. Pays his bills on time, which is more than I can say for some ranchers around here. Mr. Peterson handed over the wrapped package. Place could use a woman's touch, though. Been going to seed since his wife passed. Hannah was learning that everyone in Silvage had an opinion about everyone else, and they weren't shy about sharing those opinions. She thanked Mr. Peterson and left, very aware of the eyes that followed her down the street. On Sunday, her last day before starting at the ranch, Hannah attended church services for the first time since arriving in Silvage. The small wooden church was packed with ranchers and townspeople, all dressed in their Sunday best. Reverend Morrison, a kind-faced man in his 50s, preached a sermon about new beginnings and God's mysterious ways. Hannah sat with Sarah, very aware of the curious glances from the other congregants. After the service, several women approached her, some with genuine welcome, others with thinly veiled nosiness. "So you're the mail-order bride who arrived too late," one sharp-featured woman said, making it sound almost like an accusation. "I'm Hannah Campbell," Hannah replied evenly, refusing to be reduced to that description. "And now you're going to work for Colton Sullivan," the woman continued, her tone suggesting something scandalous about the arrangement. "I am. He needs a housekeeper, and I need employment. Quite convenient, isn't it? You arrive looking for a husband, and suddenly—" "Mrs. Thornton," Sarah's voice cut across the woman's words, cold as ice. "I think you're needed at the ladies' auxiliary planning meeting. Best hurry along." Mrs. Thornton sniffed disapprovingly but moved away. Sarah rolled her eyes. "Don't mind her. She's been trying to marry Colton off to her daughter for 2 years, and she's bitter that he's not interested." "I'm not trying to marry your brother," Hannah said, lowering her voice. "I know that. You know that. But Mrs. Thornton is going to believe what she wants to believe, and there's nothing to be done about it." Sarah linked her arm through Hannah's. "Come on, let's get you home. Big day tomorrow." That evening, as Hannah packed her few belongings into her satchel, she felt a strange mixture of anticipation and apprehension. She was leaving the safety and familiarity of Sarah's boarding house for an isolated ranch with a man she barely knew. It was another leap into the unknown, another gamble on a future she couldn't predict. But then, that's what she'd done when she'd left Boston. When she'd answered James Blackwell's advertisement. Every step forward required faith in something beyond certainty. She lay awake for a long time that night, listening to the familiar sounds of the boarding house, the creak of floorboards as the other residents settled for the night, the distant sound of piano music from the saloon, the wind rattling the window panes. Tomorrow, everything would change again. Hannah had long since learned that change was the only constant in life. The question was whether this change would lead somewhere better or somewhere worse. She'd find out soon enough. Monday morning dawned clear and cold, frost glittering on the windows like scattered diamonds. Hannah dressed carefully in her gray work dress, pinned her hair back in a practical bun, and carried her satchel downstairs to find Sarah already in the kitchen, preparing breakfast. "Couldn't sleep either?" Sarah asked, pouring coffee. "Too much thinking," Hannah admitted. They ate breakfast together in comfortable silence, years of potential friendship compressed into these few shared weeks. Hannah had grown genuinely fond of Sarah, her straightforward manner, her dry humor, her competent kindness. "I'm going to miss you," Hannah said suddenly. "I know I've only been here a short time, but you've been so kind, and I—" "Stop that right now or you'll make me cry," Sarah interrupted, but her eyes were suspiciously bright. "You're only 5 miles away, not moving to California. I'll come visit, and you can come to town. We'll see each other plenty." "Promise?" "Promise." Sarah reached across the table and squeezed Hannah's hand. "And Hannah, take care of my brother. He's a good man, but he's been alone with his grief too long. Maybe you can help him find his way back to living." Before Hannah could respond, the sound of wagon wheels announced Colton's arrival. Her stomach fluttered with nervous anticipation as she gathered her belongings. Colton came to the door, hat in hand, looking almost as nervous as Hannah felt. "Morning. You ready?" "As ready as I'll ever be," Hannah said, trying for a lightness she didn't quite feel. The goodbye with Sarah was brief but warm, filled with promises to visit and instructions for Mrs. Fletcher that they both knew the new housekeeper had already heard multiple times. Then Hannah was climbing into the wagon beside Colton, her small satchel at her feet containing everything she owned in the world. As they drove out of town, the sun breaking free of the horizon and painting the prairie gold, Hannah looked back once at Silvage. Such a small town, rough and raw, but it had offered her shelter when she'd needed it most. Now she was heading into the unknown again, trusting another stranger with her future. "Nervous?" Colton asked quietly. "A little," Hannah admitted. "That's honest, at least." He kept his eyes on the road ahead, guiding the horses with easy competence. "For what it's worth, I'm nervous too. Haven't had anyone living at the ranch since Emma and Grace died. It'll be strange having someone else in the house again." The admission made Hannah relax slightly. At least she wasn't alone in her uncertainty. They rode in silence for a while. The only sounds, the creak of the wagon, the jingle of harness, and the wind rushing through the prairie grass. The landscape that had seemed so alien and overwhelming when Hannah first arrived was becoming familiar now. The roll of the hills, the endless stretch of sky, the way the morning light turned everything to gold. "I want you to know," Colton said eventually, "that I meant what I said about this being a professional arrangement. You're my employee, nothing more. I'm not expecting anything beyond honest work for honest wages." "I appreciate that," Hannah said, though some small part of her felt an unexpected flicker of something that might have been disappointment. Which was ridiculous. She'd come west looking for practical security, not romance. "But," Colton continued, his hands tightening slightly on the reins, "I also want you to know that you're safe with me. If you ever feel uncomfortable, if anything about this arrangement doesn't suit you, you tell me immediately. You can leave whenever you want, with or without the full month. I'll make sure you have money and transportation. Your safety and comfort come first." The earnestness in his voice touched something deep in Hannah's chest. When had anyone last cared about her comfort, her safety, her well-being? "Thank you," she said softly. "That means more than you know." They crested the familiar rise, and Sullivan's Reach came into view, the White House with its wide porch, the substantial barn, the cattle grazing peacefully in the morning sun. It looked different today, knowing she'd be living here, that this would be her home, at least for a while. Colton pulled the wagon to a stop in front of the house and helped Hannah down. "Let me show you your room first, get you settled. Then we can talk about what needs doing and how you want to organize things." Her room was the guest room she'd seen on her first visit, but Colton had clearly made an effort to prepare it for her arrival. The windows were clean, the floor swept, fresh linens on the bed. A pitcher and basin sat on the washstand, and someone, Colton she realized with a warm flutter, had put a small vase of wildflowers on the dresser. "It's not fancy," Colton said, hovering in the doorway. "But it's clean, and the bed's comfortable. There's a good lock on the door, and this whole end of the hall is yours. I'm on the other end, and I'm a sound sleeper, so you'll have your privacy." "It's perfect," Hannah said, meaning it. The room was simple but bright, with windows that looked out over the prairie. It was twice the size of her room at the boarding house, and it was hers alone. "Thank you for the flowers." Colton looked embarrassed. Sarah said women like that sort of thing. Seemed like the right thing to do. After he'd left her to unpack, which took all of 5 minutes, given how little she owned, Hannah stood at the window, looking out over the land. This was her home now, at least for the next month. She'd make the most of it, prove herself valuable, earn her wages and her place. And maybe, just maybe, she'd find something here beyond just employment and survival. Maybe she'd find a future worth having. Hannah stood at the window for only a moment longer before squaring her shoulders and heading downstairs. There was work to be done, and she'd never been one to shy away from hard work. The enormity of what she'd undertaken became clearer with each room she entered. Colton hadn't exaggerated the state of his house. If anything, he'd understated it. She found him in the kitchen, attempting to make coffee with the uncertain movements of a man who rarely bothered with such niceties. He looked up as she entered, relief plain on his weathered face. "I was trying to get coffee going," he said, gesturing helplessly at the pot. "Thought you might want some after the journey, but I can't seem to—" "Let me," Hannah said, gently taking over. She dumped out his attempt, rinsed the pot, and started fresh with the practiced efficiency of someone who'd made thousands of pots of coffee at the boarding house. Within minutes, the rich aroma filled the kitchen, and she was pouring 2 cups. Colton accepted his gratefully, wrapping his work-roughened hands around the warm tin cup. "I can see I made the right choice hiring you." "It's just coffee," Hannah said, but she smiled despite herself. "It's the best coffee I've had in 3 years." He took another sip, then set down his cup. "So, where do you want to start?" Hannah looked around the kitchen. The crusted stove, the pile of dishes, the gritty floor, the cobwebs in the corners, and felt momentarily overwhelmed. Then her practical nature reasserted itself. "You ate an elephant 1 bite at a time," her mother used to say. "You tackled an impossible task 1 small step at a time." "I need supplies," she said firmly. "Soap, scrub brushes, clean rags, vinegar, baking soda. And I'll need to know where you keep your linens, if you have any clean ones left." "There's a supply closet off the mudroom," Colton said. "I think there's soap and such in there, though I can't promise it's well stocked.
And there's linens in the chest upstairs, but I honestly don't know what condition they're in. All right. Why don't you show me where everything is, and then I'd suggest you go about your regular work. I'll call you when I have lunch ready. Something that might have been relief or amusement flickered across Colton's face. You're taking charge already. You said the house was my domain, Hannah reminded him. That means I run it as I see fit, unless you've changed your mind. Not at all. It's been a long time since anyone told me what to do in my own house. But there was no resentment in his voice, only a kind of wondering relief, as if he'd been carrying a burden so long he'd forgotten what it felt like to set it down. He showed her the supply closet, which did indeed contain soap and various cleaning supplies, though everything was disorganized and some items were so old they'd hardened into uselessness. The linen chest upstairs was better. The sheets and towels were old but had been good quality once, and they were at least clean, if musty from long storage. My wife was particular about linens, Colton said quietly, running a hand over a carefully folded sheet. She'd wash and iron them, fold them just so. I haven't touched this chest since she died. Hannah could see that. The careful organization spoke of a woman who'd taken pride in her home, who'd created order and comfort in this harsh land. It made her feel strange, as if she were stepping into a ghost's shoes, trying to fill a space left empty by someone irreplaceable. She had good taste, Hannah said carefully. These are quality linens. She was a quality woman. Colton closed the chest gently, as if tucking away memories along with the fabric. All right, I'll leave you to it. I've got to check on the cattle in the north pasture and mend some fence. I'll be back around midday. After he'd gone, Hannah stood in the quiet house and took a deep breath. Then she rolled up her sleeves and got to work. She started with the kitchen because it was the heart of any home, and because cooking would be impossible in its current state. She heated water on the stove, at least that worked, once she'd cleaned out the firebox and got a proper fire going, and began the long process of scrubbing away years of accumulated grime. The work was hard and messy, but there was something almost meditative about it. Scrub, rinse, scrub again. Watch the layers of dirt give way to clean surfaces. Transform chaos into order, one small section at a time. Her back ached and her hands grew red and raw despite the soap, but she pushed on. By the time Colton returned at midday, she'd transformed the kitchen. The stove gleamed, the dishes were washed and put away in the cabinet she'd scrubbed clean, the floor had been swept and mopped, and the windows sparkled. The table was set with 2 plates, and a simple lunch of bread, cheese, and preserved vegetables from the stores she'd found in the cellar waited. Colton stopped in the doorway, his eyes widening. I can see the floor, he said, wonder in his voice. I'd forgotten what color it was. Hannah wiped her hands on her apron, suddenly self-conscious. Had she overstepped? Done too much too fast? But Colton's expression held only amazement and what looked like profound relief. It's just a start, she said. There's still so much to do. Done too much too fast? But Colton's expression held only amazement and what looked like profound relief. It's just a start, she said. There's still so much to do. It's a miracle, is what it is. He removed his hat and hung it on a peg by the door, a peg she'd cleared of the accumulated debris that had been hanging there. Miss Campbell, I don't know what I did to deserve having you show up on that train, but I'm grateful for it. Something warm unfurled in Hannah's chest at his words. When was the last time someone had been grateful for her presence? At the mill, she'd been interchangeable, replaceable. Here, she was making a difference. They ate lunch together at the now clean table, and Hannah asked him about the ranch's operations. Colton relaxed as he talked about his cattle, his land, his plans for the future. He knew ranching the way some men knew books, intimately, passionately, with the deep understanding that came from years of close attention. I want to build something lasting, he said, staring out the window at his land. Something that matters. After Emma and Grace died, I almost gave up. Thought about selling out, heading back east. But this land, it gets in your blood, and I couldn't abandon what my father built, what Emma loved. It's a good goal, Hannah said. Building something lasting. That's what everyone wants, isn't it? To leave something behind that matters. Is that what you want? Colton asked, his blue eyes curious. Hannah considered the question. What did she want?
She'd spent so long just trying to survive that she hadn't let herself want much beyond safety and security. "I suppose I want to matter," she said finally. "To have a place where I'm needed, where my presence makes a difference. To not be invisible anymore." Colton nodded slowly. "You're not invisible here, Miss Campbell. I can promise you that." The afternoon passed in more work. Hannah tackled the parlor next, and it was like excavating an archaeological site, layer after layer of accumulated debris, revealing the bones of what had once been a pleasant room. She found good furniture under the piles, discovered curtains that just needed washing, unearthed a beautiful rug that would be handsome once it was beaten clean and aired out. As the sun began to set, painting the prairie in shades of gold and amber, Hannah heard Colton come in from his work. She was on her hands and knees scrubbing the parlor floor, her hair escaping its pins and her dress soaked with wash water. "Miss Campbell," his voice made her look up. He stood in the doorway, his expression unreadable. "You need to stop." Hannah sat back on her heels, suddenly aware of how exhausted she was. Her back screamed in protest, her hands throbbed, and she was fairly certain she had blisters forming. "There's still so much to do," she protested weakly, "and it'll still be there tomorrow. You've done more in one day than I've managed in 3 years. He crossed the room and extended his hand to help her up. "Come on, you need to rest, and I need to make dinner." "You don't know how to cook," Hannah said, accepting his hand. His grip was warm and strong, steadying her as her stiff legs protested, standing. "I can manage bacon and beans. It won't be fancy, but it'll fill us up." They went to the kitchen together, and Hannah sank into a chair while Colton moved about with surprising competence, building up the fire in the stove and setting a pan to heat. He was right. His cooking was basic, but it was hot and filling, and Hannah was too tired to be particular. "I'll teach you to cook properly," she said around a mouthful of beans. "Basic things at least, so you don't starve if I'm ever sick or gone to town." "I'd appreciate that." Colton refilled her coffee cup without being asked. "Though I hope you're not planning on being sick or gone too often." They ate in comfortable silence as darkness fell outside and lamplight made the clean kitchen feel warm and almost cozy. Hannah found herself relaxing in a way she hadn't since arriving in Colorado. There was something peaceful about sitting in this kitchen with this quiet man, sharing a simple meal after a day of honest work. "Can I ask you something?" Colton said eventually, setting down his fork. "Of course." "What made you answer James's advertisement? I know circumstances back east must have been difficult, but still, coming all this way to marry a stranger takes courage. Or desperation, or both." Hannah considered how much to tell him. But he'd been honest with her about his grief, his struggles. She owed him the same honesty. "Both," she admitted. "After my parents died, I had to work in the textile mill to survive. 14-hour days, 6 days a week, for wages that barely kept me fed and housed. The conditions were terrible, the air thick with lint, the machinery dangerous. Girls lost fingers, sometimes hands. Some got sick from breathing that air day after day and never recovered." Colton's jaw tightened as he listened. "And the foreman," Hannah continued, her voice hardening. "He thought a woman alone was fair game for his attentions. When I refused him, he made my life miserable, found reasons to dock my pay, gave me the worst assignments, made it clear I could lose my position entirely if I didn't cooperate." "He hurt you?" Colton's voice was dangerously quiet. "He tried. I fought him off, but I knew it was only a matter of time before he tried again, or before I lost my job for refusing him. I was trapped, couldn't afford to leave, couldn't afford to stay. Then I saw James's advertisement in the Matrimonial Times." She wrapped her hands around her coffee cup, taking comfort in its warmth. "It offered an escape, a new life, a fresh start. Maybe not love, but safety and security with a man who promised to treat me with respect. That seemed like enough." "It should have been more than enough," Colton said. "Every woman deserves that much at minimum. Most women don't get even that much." Hannah met his eyes across the table. "I took a gamble on a stranger's promises because staying was worse than leaving. And when I arrived too late to meet James, I thought the gamble had failed. But then you offered me this position, and I realized I'd been given a second chance. Not the one I expected, but maybe the one I needed." Something shifted in the air between them, a deepening of understanding and connection. Colton held her gaze for a long moment, and Hannah felt her heartbeat quicken in a way that had nothing to do with exhaustion. "I'm glad you're here," Colton said simply. "For whatever that's worth." "It's worth a great deal," Hannah replied. The days that followed fell into a rhythm that Hannah found both exhausting and deeply satisfying. She rose before dawn to prepare breakfast for Colton before he went out to work with the cattle. After he left, she would tackle another section of the house. The parlor one day, the office the next, then upstairs bedrooms and hallways. Each day brought visible progress, transformation from neglect to care. The office was perhaps the most challenging task. Hannah spent 2 full days just sorting through the chaos of papers, creating order from disorder. She set up a proper filing system, separated bills from receipts, organized correspondence by date. When she finally presented Colton with a clear accounting of what he owed and what was owed to him, his amazement was almost comical. "You're telling me that old Henderson actually owes me $300 for cattle I sold him last spring?" Colton stared at the neatly written ledger Hannah had created. "According to these receipts, yes. He paid half at the time of sale and promised the rest within 3 months. That was 6 months ago. I completely forgot about it. Thought he'd paid in full." Colton shook his head in wonder. "Miss Campbell, you've just found me money I didn't even know I had." Hannah felt a warm glow of pride. "That's what a proper accounting system does. You won't lose track of debts or payments anymore." As the days turned into weeks, the house was transformed. The parlor became a genuinely pleasant room, with clean furniture, aired-out rugs, and curtains that Hannah had washed and rehung. The kitchen gleamed, and Hannah had begun to stock the pantry properly, making lists of supplies they'd need to order from town. She'd even convinced Colton to let her clean his bedroom while he was out working, though she'd been careful to touch only what needed cleaning, respecting his privacy and his memories. The only room she hadn't entered was Grace's nursery. That door remained closed, and Hannah didn't suggest opening it. Some grief needed time and permission, and she had neither the right nor the desire to rush Colton's healing. But she did notice small changes in him as the house came back to life. He smiled more readily. His shoulders didn't carry quite such a heavy burden. He'd even started taking more care with his appearance, shaving more regularly and wearing cleaner shirts. "Sarah visited yesterday while you were in the north pasture," Hannah told him one evening over supper. A proper supper now, with roasted chicken, vegetables, and fresh bread she'd made that afternoon. "Did she?" Colton helped himself to more chicken. "What did she think of the place?" "She said she didn't recognize it, said it looked like a real home again instead of a bachelor's disaster." Hannah smiled at the memory of Sarah's delighted exclamations. "She also said I was performing miracles." "She's not wrong." Colton met Hannah's eyes across the table. "You've brought this place back to life, Miss Campbell. Brought me back to life, in a way." The intensity in his gaze made Hannah's breath catch. Over the past weeks, she'd grown increasingly aware of Colton in ways that went beyond employer and employee. The way his eyes crinkled when he smiled, the sound of his laugh, rare but genuine when it came, the easy strength in his movements, the competence of his hands, the kindness in his voice when he spoke to her. She'd catch herself watching him sometimes as he worked in the yard, admiring the play of muscles beneath his shirt, the way sunlight caught in his dark hair. And she'd noticed his eyes on her too, not in the predatory way the mill foreman had looked at her, but with something warmer, something that felt like genuine appreciation and growing affection. "It's just housework," Hannah said, but her voice was unsteady. "It's more than that, and you know it." Colton set down his fork and leaned forward. "Hannah, may I call you Hannah?" The use of her first name sent a flutter through her chest. "Yes." "Hannah, I want you to know that I value your work here tremendously, but I've also come to value your company, your presence in this house, in my life. It's meant more than I can properly express." Hannah's heart was racing now. "Colton, A sharp knock at the door interrupted whatever she'd been about to say. They both startled, the intimate moment broken. Colton rose with obvious reluctance and went to answer it. "Henderson," Hannah heard him say with surprise. "What brings you out here at this hour?" She couldn't hear the response, but Colton's voice when he replied was tight with barely controlled anger. "You're sure about this?" More conversation, and then Colton returned to the kitchen, his expression grim. Behind him came a weathered man in his 60s, hat in hand, looking uncomfortable. Hannah, this is Mr. Henderson. He has some news. Henderson nodded to Hannah, then turned back to Colton. I'm real sorry to be bringing this up now, Sullivan, but I thought you should know before everyone in town starts talking. There's been some trouble over at the old Blackwell place. Hannah's attention sharpened at the mention of James's ranch. What kind of trouble? Colton asked. Strangers arrived a few days ago, men from back east, lawyers and such. Turns out James Blackwell's cousin, the one who inherited, he's sold the place. New owner took possession today. Henderson shifted his weight uncomfortably. Thing is, the new owner, well, it's a woman, young widow from Philadelphia, name of Mrs. Thornton, Catherine Thornton. The name meant nothing to Hannah, but she saw Colton's expression darken. Any relation to Agnes Thornton in town? Her daughter-in-law, apparently, widow of her son who died in the war. Mrs. Agnes has been writing to her for months, convinced her to come west and buy the Blackwell place. Henderson's discomfort grew. Word is she's looking to establish herself as a proper rancher, and she's got the money to do it. Brought several hired men with her, plans to expand operations significantly. So we have new neighbors, Colton said flatly. I fail to see why this requires a visit at supper time. Henderson cleared his throat. Because Mrs. Thornton has been asking questions about you, Sullivan. Very particular questions. And her mother-in-law has been talking, telling her all about how you hired yourself a mail-order bride who was supposed to marry the previous owner. He glanced apologetically at Hannah. No offense intended, miss. None taken, Hannah said faintly, though her stomach had dropped. The point is, Henderson continued, there's going to be talk. More talk than there already was. And Mrs. Thornton, from what I've heard, is the type to use talk to her advantage. Just thought you should know before you ride into town and get blindsided by gossip. After Henderson left, Colton and Hannah sat in heavy silence. The earlier warmth and intimacy of their conversation felt very far away now. I'm sorry, Hannah said finally. I'm causing problems for you. You're not causing anything, Colton said firmly. People talk no matter what you do, and frankly, I don't give a damn what Mrs. Agnes Thornton or her daughter-in-law think about my household arrangements. But other people do. It matters what they think. Why? Why should it matter? Colton's frustration was evident. We know the truth. You're my housekeeper, here on proper terms, earning honest wages. Anyone who wants to make something sordid out of that says more about them than about us. Hannah wanted to believe him, but she'd lived enough life to know that reputation mattered, especially for a woman, and especially in a small town where everyone knew everyone else's business. Maybe I should leave, she said quietly. Go to another town, find work there. That would stop the talk. No. The word came out fierce and immediate. No, you're not leaving because of gossip. You have a place here, Hannah. A real place. I won't let small-minded people drive you away. The protectiveness in his voice stirred something deep in Hannah's chest. No one had defended her like this since her parents died. No one had treated her as if her presence mattered, as if she was worth fighting for. The month is almost up anyway, she said, though her heart ached at the thought. I could simply leave when the trial period ends. Is that what you want? Colton moved closer, his blue eyes intense on hers. Do you want to leave? Hannah thought about leaving this house she'd brought back to life, leaving Sarah's friendship, leaving the vast prairie sky and the mountains in the distance, leaving Colton. No, she admitted, I don't want to leave. Then don't. Stay, please. His hand moved as if he might reach for hers, then stopped. I know this was supposed to be just employment, just business. But somewhere along the way it became more than that, at least for me. Hannah's breath caught. Colton, I'm not asking for anything you're not ready to give, he said quickly. I'm not pressuring you for more than you want to offer, but I need you to know that you've become important to me. Your presence here, the way you've brought light back into this house, into my life. I don't want to lose that. I don't want to lose you. The raw honesty in his voice, the vulnerability in his eyes, broke through the last of Hannah's carefully maintained defenses. She'd been telling herself this was just a job, just a temporary arrangement. But somewhere between scrubbing floors and organizing paperwork and sharing quiet meals, she'd fallen into something deeper. You've become important to me too, she confessed. I didn't expect it, didn't plan for it.
But every day I spend here, I find it harder to imagine leaving. Colton did reach for her hand then, his calloused fingers closing gently around hers. Then stay, not as my employee, or not only as that. Stay as... He seemed to struggle for words. Stay as someone I'm courting, someone I'm hoping might eventually consider a future here. With me. Hannah's heart hammered against her ribs. This was happening so fast, yet somehow it felt right in a way her arrangement with James Blackwell never had. She barely knew Colton by any objective measure. A few weeks, a handful of conversations. But she knew his kindness, his integrity, his capacity for deep feeling. She knew he treated her as an equal, valued her work, respected her opinions. And she knew, with sudden clarity, that she was falling in love with him. "I'd like that," she said softly. "I'd like that very much." The smile that broke across Colton's face was like sunrise after a long night. He raised her hand to his lips, pressing a gentle kiss to her work-roughened knuckles. "Then we'll face whatever talk comes together," he said. "Let Mrs. Thornton and the gossips say what they want. We know the truth." But as October gave way to November and the weather turned colder, the gossip did indeed intensify. Catherine Thornton proved to be everything Henderson's warning had suggested: beautiful, wealthy, and ruthlessly ambitious. She was also, it quickly became apparent, interested in Colton Sullivan. She began appearing at church services, always positioning herself where Colton couldn't help but notice her. She called at Sullivan's Reach one afternoon under the pretext of seeking advice about ranching, arriving in an elegant buggy and wearing a dress that was far too fine for a casual visit. Hannah, answering the door in her work dress with flour on her apron, felt distinctly outclassed. "You must be the housekeeper," Catherine said with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. She was perhaps 28, with honey blonde hair arranged in the latest fashion and the kind of porcelain beauty that suggested she'd never done a day's hard work in her life. "I'm Mrs. Catherine Thornton, the new owner of the Blackwell property. I was hoping to speak with Mr. Sullivan about some ranching matters." "Of course," Hannah said, maintaining her composure with effort. "Please, come in. I'll fetch him." She showed Catherine into the parlor, the room she'd worked so hard to restore, and went to find Colton, who was working in the barn. He looked less than pleased when she delivered the message. "Mrs. Thornton, what does she want?" "She said ranching advice." Hannah tried to keep her voice neutral, but some of her discomfort must have shown. Colton's expression softened. "You all right?" "Of course, she's your neighbor. It's natural she'd visit." But as Colton went inside to receive Catherine, Hannah found herself unable to settle to her work. She tried to continue with the bread she'd been making, but her ears strained to hear the conversation drifting from the parlor. Catherine's light laugh, Colton's deeper voice responding with polite reserve. The visit lasted an hour. When Catherine finally left, she made a point of seeking out Hannah in the kitchen. "Thank you for the hospitality, Miss... I'm sorry, I didn't catch your name." "Campbell. Hannah Campbell." "Ah, yes, the famous mail-order bride." Catherine's smile was sharp. "What a terrible tragedy, arriving too late. But how fortunate that Mr. Sullivan was kind enough to give you employment. It must be such a relief having a position after such disappointment." The words were sympathetic, but the tone was not. Hannah felt herself bristle but forced a smile. "Mr. Sullivan's kindness has indeed been a blessing." "I'm sure it has, though I must say it's rather unusual, isn't it? A young unmarried woman living alone with an unmarried man. People do talk." Catherine adjusted her expensive gloves with elaborate care. "Not that I participate in gossip, of course. I'm merely concerned for your reputation, and his." "My reputation is quite secure, thank you," Hannah said coolly, "as is Mr. Sullivan's." Of course, of course." Catherine moved toward the door, then paused. "You know, if you're ever looking for alternative employment, I'm sure I could find a position for you at my ranch. I'll be hiring staff soon, and a woman with your obvious domestic skills would be quite valuable. It might be more appropriate." The implication was clear, more appropriate than staying here with Colton. After Catherine had gone, Hannah stood in the kitchen, her hands shaking with suppressed anger. She heard Colton come in from seeing their visitor off. "Hannah?" He appeared in the kitchen doorway, his expression concerned. "What did she say to you?" "Nothing important." "That's not true. You're upset.
I can see it. Hannah set down the bowl she'd been clutching. She implied that my staying here is inappropriate, that people are talking, and she's right. They are talking. Let them talk. Colton crossed the room and took Hannah's hands in his. I don't care what Catherine Thornton or anyone else thinks. You belong here. Do I? Hannah's voice was small. She's beautiful, wealthy, established. She's everything a rancher's wife should be. And I'm just, you're everything I want, Colton interrupted firmly. Catherine Thornton could be the Queen of England for all I care. She's not you. She hasn't brought life back to this house, to me. She hasn't made me want to wake up in the morning, to imagine a future that includes more than just surviving. His words made Hannah's throat tight with emotion. But Colton, the gossip, will stop the minute I make my intentions clear. He released her hands and stepped back slightly, his expression turning serious. Hannah, I know we haven't known each other long. I know this isn't how courtships usually work, but I also know that I'm falling in love with you. Have been for weeks now. And I hope, you might feel something similar. Hannah's heart raced. I do. I feel exactly the same way. Then marry me. The words came out urgent, intense, not because of gossip or propriety, but because I want a life with you, because I want to fall asleep beside you every night and wake up to you every morning, because I want to build something lasting with you, not just a ranch, but a real home, a family. It was too fast. They'd known each other only weeks. By any rational standard, this was madness. But Hannah had tried rationality when she'd answered James Blackwell's advertisement, entering into a practical arrangement with a stranger. That had been sensible, measured, careful. This, what she felt for Colton, was none of those things. It was wild and immediate and terrifying in its intensity, but it was also real in a way nothing else in her life had ever been. Yes, she heard herself say. Yes, I'll marry you. Colton pulled her into his arms, holding her tight against his chest. She could feel his heart hammering, matching the frantic beat of her own. We'll do it soon, he said into her hair, before winter sets in properly, before anyone can say we're rushing because of scandal. We're rushing because we want to, because life's too short to waste time when you've found something worth holding on to. Hannah pulled back enough to look up at him. Sarah's going to say we're crazy. Sarah's going to say it's about damn time. Colton's smile was radiant, transforming his usually serious face. She's been telling me for weeks that I was falling in love with you. She told me the same thing. Smart woman, my sister. They stood there in the kitchen, holding each other as afternoon light slanted through the windows Hannah had cleaned, in the house she'd brought back to life. Outside, the prairie wind sang its endless song, and somewhere in the distance cattle lowed peacefully. Hannah thought about the train that had brought her here, one day late to meet a stranger who'd died before she could know him. She thought about standing on that platform, believing her life was over, her dreams in ruins. She'd been wrong. She hadn't arrived too late for her future. She'd arrived exactly on time for it. The news of their engagement spread through Silvage faster than a prairie fire. Colton had ridden into town the very next morning to speak with Reverend Morrison about arranging a wedding, and by that afternoon it seemed the entire territory knew that Colton Sullivan was marrying his housekeeper, the mail-order bride who'd arrived too late. Sarah was the first to arrive at the ranch, her buggy rattling up the drive at a speed that suggested either great excitement or great alarm. Hannah, who'd been hanging laundry in the cold November air, watched her approach with a mixture of anticipation and apprehension. "Hannah Campbell," Sarah called out before she'd even fully stopped the buggy. "Tell me it's true. Tell me my stubborn, grief-locked brother finally came to his senses." Hannah couldn't help but smile at Sarah's enthusiasm. "It's true. We're getting married." Sarah let out a whoop of joy that probably carried all the way back to town, then practically leaped from the buggy to pull Hannah into a fierce embrace. "I knew it. I knew from the moment he brought you to the boarding house that something was different about how he looked at you. Oh, Hannah, I'm so happy I could cry." "Please don't cry," Hannah said, though her own eyes were suspiciously damp. "I've been doing enough of that for both of us." "Happy tears, I hope." "Terrified tears, mostly," Hannah admitted. "Sarah, this is happening so fast. We've known each other barely 2 months. What if we're making a terrible mistake? Sarah held Hannah at arm's length, her expression turning serious. Listen to me. I've known my brother his entire life. I watched him fall in love with Emma, watched them build a life together, watched him nearly die of grief when he lost her and Grace. For 3 years, he's been a ghost, just going through the motions of living. But these past weeks, since you came here, I've seen him come back to life. He smiles again. He makes plans. He talks about the future like it's something worth having. But what if I can't be what he needs? The fear that had been gnawing at Hannah since she'd accepted Colton's proposal burst out. What if I can't replace Emma? What if I'm always just second best, the woman who came after? Oh, honey, Sarah's voice was infinitely gentle. You're not replacing Emma. No one could, and Colton wouldn't want you to try. You're writing your own chapter in his story, not trying to rewrite the one that's already finished. That's what makes this right. Before Hannah could respond, another buggy appeared on the horizon, this one much finer than Sarah's practical conveyance. Hannah's stomach sank as she recognized the elegant vehicle. Catherine Thornton had come calling again. Well, Sarah said dryly, following Hannah's gaze, this should be interesting. Catherine descended from her buggy with practiced grace, her expensive traveling dress immaculate despite the dusty road. Her smile was bright and brittle as glass. Miss Sullivan, how delightful to see you. And Miss Campbell. The pause before Hannah's name was deliberate, weighted. I heard the most extraordinary news in town and simply had to come verify it myself. Surely the rumors can't be true. That depends on the rumors, Sarah said coolly. She'd never liked Catherine Thornton, even before the woman had moved west. That Mr. Sullivan has proposed marriage to his housekeeper. Catherine's laugh was like wind chimes, pretty and cold. I told Agnes it must be a misunderstanding. After all, Colton, Mr. Sullivan, barely knows the woman. And given her, circumstances, well, it would be quite the scandal, wouldn't it? There's no scandal, Hannah said, finding her voice despite the way her heart hammered. Mr. Sullivan and I are engaged to be married, and we're very happy about it. Are you, though? Catherine's eyes were sharp despite her sweet smile. Forgive me for being frank, Miss Campbell, but you arrived here expecting to marry one man, found him dead, and within weeks accepted another man's proposal. Some might say that looks rather opportunistic. The word hit like a slap. Hannah felt heat flood her cheeks, but before she could formulate a response, Sarah stepped forward. And some might say that a wealthy widow from Philadelphia buying a ranch she knows nothing about and immediately pursuing her neighbor looks rather opportunistic, Sarah said with dangerous pleasantness. But I suppose that's different, isn't it, Mrs. Thornton? Catherine's composure cracked slightly. I came here to build a legitimate business, not to trap a husband. Then we're in perfect agreement, because Hannah came here for legitimate work, not to trap a husband. The fact that she and Colton fell in love was neither planned nor opportunistic. It was simply two people finding each other when they both needed someone most. The sound of hoofbeats interrupted the increasingly tense confrontation. Colton rode up on his horse, and Hannah had never been more relieved to see anyone in her life. He dismounted with easy grace, his eyes immediately finding Hannah with a concern that warmed her despite the cold November wind. Mrs. Thornton, he said with polite neutrality, I wasn't expecting another visit so soon. I came to offer my congratulations on your engagement, Catherine said, though her smile was strained. Though I must confess, I'm quite surprised by the suddenness of it all. Are you? Colton moved to stand beside Hannah, his presence solid and protective. I'm not. When you meet the right person, you know it. No point in wasting time with lengthy courtships when you're certain of what you want. But how can you be certain after such a short acquaintance? Surely prudence would suggest— Prudence, Colton interrupted quietly, would have suggested I give up and die of grief 3 years ago. Prudence would have kept me locked in the past, afraid to risk my heart again. But Hannah taught me that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is take a chance on something new, even when you're terrified it might not work out. His words made Hannah's throat tighten with emotion. She reached for his hand and he took it immediately, lacing their fingers together in full view of Catherine and Sarah. We're getting married in 2 weeks, Colton continued. You're welcome to attend the ceremony if you'd like, Mrs. Thornton,
but I'd appreciate it if you'd stop questioning my choices in the meantime. I'm a grown man who knows his own mind." Catherine's composure had fully cracked now, revealing the anger beneath her polished exterior. "You're making a mistake.
She's not suitable for you, for this life. She's a mill worker from Boston who came west looking for any man desperate enough to take her." "That's enough." Colton's voice went cold as winter wind. "You don't know anything about Hannah, about what she's survived or what she's capable of. She's brought life back to this ranch, to me. She's made me remember what it feels like to hope for the future, and I'll be damned if I let anyone, including you, speak about her with such disrespect." Catherine's face flushed with humiliation and fury. For a moment, Hannah almost felt sorry for her. It couldn't be easy being rejected so publicly. But then Catherine's eyes met hers, and the cold calculation there erased any sympathy. "You'll regret this," Catherine said, addressing both of them. "When the novelty wears off and you realize what a mistake you've made, don't come looking for sympathy from me." She swept back to her buggy with as much dignity as she could muster and drove away at a speed that suggested deep anger. Sarah let out a low whistle. "Well, you've made an enemy there, I'm afraid." "I can live with that," Colton said. He turned to Hannah, his expression softening. "Are you all right? I'm sorry you had to deal with that." "I'm fine." And surprisingly, she was. Catherine's words had stung, but Colton's fierce defense had soothed the hurt almost before it could take root. "Thank you for defending me." "Always," Colton said simply. Then, seeming to remember his sister's presence, he turned to Sarah with a slightly sheepish expression. "I suppose congratulations are in order?" Sarah laughed and pulled him into a hug. "About time, brother. I was beginning to think you'd stay a grieving widower forever." "So was I," Colton admitted quietly. "But then a certain stubborn woman showed up and wouldn't let me." The 2 weeks before the wedding passed in a blur of activity and preparation. Hannah had insisted on a small, simple ceremony. The last thing she wanted was to give the gossips more material. But Sarah had other ideas. "Absolutely not," Sarah declared when Hannah suggested they simply go to the church with minimal fuss. "You're going to have a proper wedding with a proper dress and proper celebration. This town needs to see that Colton Sullivan is proud to marry you, not ashamed." "I'm not ashamed," Colton protested. "I'd marry her tomorrow in our work clothes if that's what she wanted." "Which is sweet but impractical," Sarah said firmly. "Hannah, you deserve a real wedding. Every woman does. Let me help make it special." In the end, Hannah agreed, touched by Sarah's determination to give her the kind of wedding she'd never imagined having. They went to the general store together, where Sarah ordered fabric for a dress from her own money despite Hannah's protests. "Consider it a wedding gift," Sarah said. "Besides, I want the pleasure of making you a dress that will make every woman in Silvage green with envy." Sarah proved to be a skilled seamstress, and over the following week a beautiful dress took shape, simple but elegant, made of soft dove-gray wool with delicate embroidery at the collar and cuffs. Hannah had insisted it be practical, something she could wear again after the wedding, and Sarah had created exactly that. The preparations also meant spending more time in town, and Hannah couldn't avoid the whispers and stares that followed her. Some people were genuinely kind, offering congratulations and best wishes. Others were clearly skeptical or disapproving, their tight smiles and careful words barely concealing their opinions about the hasty marriage. Mrs. Agnes Thornton, Catherine's mother-in-law, was particularly icy. Hannah encountered her outside the general store one afternoon, and the older woman looked her up and down with obvious disdain. "I suppose you think you've done quite well for yourself," Mrs. Thornton said. "Coming west to marry one man, ending up with another within weeks. Some might call that calculated." "Some might," Hannah agreed, keeping her voice level. "But those who actually know me might call it fortunate. I didn't plan to fall in love with Colton, Mrs. Thornton. It simply happened." Love. The word dripped with skepticism. How convenient that this love happened to come with a prosperous ranch and a respected name. Hannah felt anger rise in her chest, but she forced it down. Responding to this woman's bitterness would accomplish nothing. "I'm sorry you see it that way," she said quietly. "But nothing I say will change your mind, so I won't waste either of our time trying. Good day, Mrs. Thornton." She walked away with her head high, refusing to let the woman's poison touch her. But later, when she told Colton about the encounter, she couldn't quite keep the hurt from her voice. She called me calculated, as if I planned all of this, as if I somehow orchestrated James's death so I could marry you instead. Colton pulled her close, his arms strong and steady around her. People like Agnes Thornton need someone to judge because it makes them feel superior. You know the truth, I know the truth, that's all that matters. But what if she's right? Hannah pulled back to look at him, voicing the fear that had been gnawing at her. What if I am being calculated without meaning to? I came here looking for security, and I found it with you. How do I know my feelings are real and not just practical? Do you feel practical when I hold you? Colton asked, his blue eyes intense on hers. Hannah's breath caught. No. Do you feel calculated when we sit together in the evening, when we talk about our days and our dreams? No. When I kiss you, he suited action to words, pressing his lips gently to hers. Does that feel like a business arrangement? Hannah's heart raced, her entire body warming at his touch. Definitely not. Then stop letting other people's opinions make you doubt what we have. Colton rested his forehead against hers. I love you, Hannah Campbell. Not your housekeeping skills, not your ability to organize paperwork, though I appreciate those things. I love your strength, your determination, the way you refuse to be defeated by hardship. I love your laugh, your smile, the way you hum to yourself when you're working. I love who I am when I'm with you. Tears pricked Hannah's eyes. I love you too, so much it terrifies me sometimes. Good. Being terrified means it matters, means it's worth protecting. As the wedding day approached, Hannah found herself both excited and anxious. The house was ready, cleaner and more welcoming than it had been in years. Her dress was finished, hanging carefully in her room. Sarah had planned a small reception at the boarding house after the ceremony, just close friends and family. The night before the wedding, Sarah insisted that Hannah stay with her in town, citing tradition about the groom not seeing the bride before the ceremony. Besides, Sarah said with a knowing smile, you need a proper last night as a single woman. We're going to drink tea, eat too many of my cinnamon rolls, and talk about everything except tomorrow's nerves. But of course, they ended up talking about exactly that. As they sat in Sarah's cozy kitchen with the lamps burning low and the town quiet around them, Hannah found herself confessing her fears. What if I can't be enough for him? What if he compares me to Emma and I come up short? Emma was his first love, Sarah said gently, and she'll always hold a special place in his heart. But Hannah, you're his second chance at love. That doesn't make it less real or less important. If anything, it makes it more precious because he knows how rare it is, how easily it can be lost. What was she like? Emma? Sarah considered the question thoughtfully. She was quiet, gentle, deeply kind. She loved this land in a way that surprised everyone. You'd have thought a woman from a civilized place like Denver would hate the isolation, but she thrived on it. She made that ranch house into a real home, filled it with warmth and laughter. Hannah's heart sank. I could never— Stop, Sarah interrupted. You're doing it again, comparing yourself to someone you never knew. Emma was wonderful, yes, but so are you, just in different ways. Emma was gentle. You're strong. She was quiet. You're forthright. She made the ranch a home through small domestic touches. You've made it a home by bringing it back from complete neglect through sheer determination. Different doesn't mean lesser. What about Grace? Hannah asked quietly. How can I ever fill the hole that losing a child leaves? Sarah's eyes filled with tears. You can't. And Colton wouldn't want you to try. Grace was his daughter, and he'll mourn her for the rest of his life. But that doesn't mean he can't have more children, can't build a new family. The heart doesn't have a limit on how much love it can hold, Hannah. It just keeps expanding. The words comforted Hannah more than she could express. She reached across the table and squeezed Sarah's hand. Thank you for everything. For taking me in when I had nowhere to go, for being my friend, for helping me see that I deserve this happiness. You do deserve it, Sarah said firmly. And tomorrow, I'm going to watch my brother marry a woman who's exactly right for him, and I'm going to cry happy tears all through the ceremony. The wedding day dawned clear and cold, the kind of November morning where frost painted the world silver and every breath misted in the air. Hannah woke early in Sarah's spare room, her stomach a tangle of nerves and excitement. This was really happening. In a few hours, she would be married to Colton Sullivan. Sarah helped her dress, carefully fastening the buttons on the gray wool dress and arranging Hannah's hair in a simple but elegant style. When Hannah finally looked at herself in the mirror, she barely recognized the woman looking back. Not the exhausted mill worker from Boston, not the devastated bride who'd arrived too late, but someone new. Someone who'd survived loss and disappointment and found something worth holding on to on the other side. "You're beautiful," Sarah whispered, her eyes already damp with tears. "Colton's going to fall apart when he sees you." The church was small and drafty, but someone, probably Sarah, had decorated it with late-season wildflowers and pine boughs that filled the air with their sharp, clean scent. The pews held perhaps 30 people, a mix of ranchers and townspeople who'd come to witness the ceremony. Hannah stood at the back of the church, her hand trembling slightly as she held a simple bouquet of dried flowers Sarah had assembled. Through the open door, she could see Colton standing at the altar with Reverend Morrison, his back straight and his hands clasped in front of him. "Ready?" Sarah asked, appearing at her elbow. "Yes," Hannah said, and found that she meant it. Whatever doubts she'd had, whatever fears the gossips had stirred up, they fell away as she looked at the man waiting for her. This was right. This was where she was meant to be. She walked down the aisle alone. She had no father to give her away, no family except the one she was creating. And she was glad of it. This marriage wasn't about being given from one man to another. It was about two people choosing each other, building something together from the ground up. Colton turned as she approached, and the expression on his face made her breath catch. He looked at her as if she were something precious and miraculous, as if he couldn't quite believe his good fortune. His eyes were suspiciously bright, and when she reached him, he took her hand with fingers that trembled slightly. "You're beautiful," he whispered. "So are you," Hannah whispered back, making him smile through his emotion. Reverend Morrison began the ceremony, his voice warm and steady as he spoke about the sacred bond of marriage, about choosing to build a life together through joy and sorrow, abundance and want. Hannah barely heard the words, too focused on Colton's face, on the way his thumb traced gentle circles on the back of her hand. When it came time for the vows, Colton's voice was rough with emotion, but steady with certainty. "I, Colton James Sullivan, take you, Hannah Rose Campbell, to be my lawfully wedded wife. I promise to love you, honor you, and stand by you through whatever life brings. I promise to be worthy of the trust you've placed in me, to make you laugh when you're sad, to hold you when you're scared, and to remind you every day that you're exactly where you belong." Hannah's voice wavered as she spoke her own vows, tears streaming freely down her cheeks. "I, Hannah Rose Campbell, take you, Colton James Sullivan, to be my lawfully wedded husband. I promise to love you, support you, and build a life with you that honors both our past and our future. I promise to be your partner in all things, to bring light to the darkness, and to remind you every day that hope is worth having." Reverend Morrison smiled as he pronounced them husband and wife. "You may kiss your bride, Colton." Colton cupped Hannah's face in his work-roughened hands and kissed her with a tenderness that made her heart soar. The small congregation erupted in applause and cheers, and when they finally pulled apart, both of them were crying and laughing at the same time. They walked back down the aisle together, husband and wife, and stepped out into the cold November sunshine. A few enterprising souls had thrown dried flower petals, someone's contribution to making the day festive, and Hannah laughed as they rained down around them. "Mrs. Sullivan," Colton said, testing out the name. "How does that sound?" "Like home," Hannah replied. The reception at Sarah's boarding house was simple but joyful. Someone had brought a fiddle, and there was music and dancing in the main room that Sarah had cleared for the occasion. The food was plentiful, everyone had contributed something, and the atmosphere was warm despite the cold weather outside. Hannah found herself pulled into conversation after conversation, accepting congratulations and best wishes from people she was only beginning to know. Most were genuinely kind, clearly happy to see Colton moving forward with his life. A few were more reserved, still skeptical of the hasty marriage, but even they were polite. Catherine Thornton did not attend, which was a relief. But Mrs. Agnes Thornton did make a brief appearance, arriving late and leaving early, her presence more obligatory than celebratory. She offered stiff congratulations to Colton and barely acknowledged Hannah at all. "I give it 6 months," Hannah overheard her mutter to another woman. "Mark my words, this marriage will fall apart before spring." Colton must have heard it too, because his arm tightened around Hannah's waist. But instead of anger, his expression held only pity. "Some people can't stand to see others happy because it reminds them of their own bitterness," he murmured in Hannah's ear. "Don't let her poison touch you." Hannah leaned into his warmth. "I won't. I have too much to be happy about." As the afternoon wore on and the celebration continued, Hannah found herself watching Colton with growing tenderness. He was dancing with Sarah, laughing at something she'd said, and the transformation from the grief-haunted man she'd first met was remarkable. He looked younger, lighter, as if someone had lifted an impossible weight from his shoulders. Sarah caught Hannah watching and steered Colton back in her direction. "I'm returning your husband," she said with a grin. "Try not to look quite so besotted with him in public. You're making the unmarried women jealous." "Too late for that," Colton said, pulling Hannah close. "Everyone already knows I'm completely besotted with my wife." The word sent a thrill through Hannah. Wife. She was Colton's wife now, bound to him legally and spiritually, partners in building a life together. As evening approached and the celebration began to wind down, Colton and Hannah prepared to leave. They'd spend their wedding night at the ranch, their home now, together, before settling into the routines of married life. Sarah hugged them both fiercely at the door. "Be happy," she whispered to Hannah. "You both deserve it so much." The ride back to Sullivan's Reach was quiet, both of them tired from the long day, but content. The sun was setting in a blaze of crimson and gold, painting the prairie in shades of fire. Colton kept one arm around Hannah as he drove, and she leaned into his solid warmth. "Tired?" he asked. "Exhausted," Hannah admitted, but in the best possible way. When they reached the ranch, Colton pulled the wagon to a stop and turned to face her fully. "Before we go inside, there's something I want to say." Hannah waited, her heart beating faster. "I know this marriage happened fast. I know people have doubts about whether it's real or lasting. But Hannah, I want you to know that I'm in this completely. This isn't a convenience or a remedy for loneliness. You're not a replacement for what I lost. You're the beginning of something new, something I thought I'd never have again." "I know," Hannah said softly. "I feel the same way. I'm going to spend the rest of my life making sure you never regret taking a chance on me. Making sure you know how valued you are. How loved." Hannah reached up to cup his cheek, feeling the scratch of stubble against her palm. "And I'm going to spend the rest of my life showing you that hope is worth having, that the future can be just as beautiful as the past, just in different ways." Colton kissed her then, deep and thorough, a kiss full of promise and passion and profound tenderness. When they finally pulled apart, both of them were breathing hard. "Welcome home, Mrs. Sullivan," Colton said. He helped her down from the wagon and, in a move that surprised her, swept her up into his arms. "Colton, what are you doing?" "Carrying my bride over the threshold," he said, grinning. "It's tradition." He carried her up the porch steps and through the front door of the house she'd brought back to life, the house that was now truly their home. The lamps were already lit. Sarah must have arranged it somehow, casting warm golden light through the rooms Hannah had scrubbed and polished and cared for. Colton set her down gently in the parlor, and they stood there for a moment, just looking at each other in the lamplight. The house was quiet around them, waiting, full of possibility. "I love you," Hannah said. "I love you too," Colton replied. "Come to bed, wife. Tomorrow we start building our future. Tonight, let's just be together." He led her upstairs to the room that had been his alone, but would now be theirs. Someone, again probably Sarah, had made up the bed with fresh linens and left a lamp burning low on the nightstand. The room felt warm and welcoming, not like a shrine to the past, but like a space ready for new memories. As Colton closed the door behind them, Hannah felt the last of her doubts fall away. She'd arrived in Colorado one day late to meet a stranger, believing her future was over before it had begun. But she'd been wrong. She hadn't arrived too late. She'd arrived exactly when she was meant to, exactly where she belonged, with exactly the right man. Everything else was just the beginning. The first snow came in early December, transforming the prairie into a landscape of white silence. Hannah woke to find frost patterns on the bedroom windows, and Colton already gone from their bed, his side still warm where he'd been lying. She stretched luxuriously, marveling at how quickly this had become normal. Waking in this room, in this bed, married to a man she'd known only a few months but loved with an intensity that still surprised her. She dressed quickly in the cold room and went downstairs to find Colton stoking the fire in the kitchen stove, already dressed for work. He looked up as she entered, and the smile that crossed his face was pure warmth. "Morning, wife. I was trying to let you sleep in." "The bed was too cold without you," Hannah said, moving into his arms for a kiss that tasted of coffee and promise. "Sorry, the cattle needed checking, and I wanted to make sure the barn was secure before the storm gets worse." He nodded toward the window, where snow was beginning to fall more heavily. "Looks like we're in for a proper blizzard." Hannah had learned quickly that winter on the prairie was nothing like winter in Boston. Here, storms could sweep in with terrifying speed, burying the land under feet of snow and isolating the ranch for days or even weeks. But she'd also learned that Colton was prepared for such eventualities. The barn was stocked with hay, the cellar full of preserved food, and the woodshed packed with enough fuel to keep them warm through the worst weather. "Then I'd better make sure we have enough bread baked," Hannah said practically. "And I'll get a pot of stew started, something hearty that can simmer all day." They worked together in comfortable synchronicity, the easy partnership of two people learning each other's rhythms. Colton brought in extra wood while Hannah started the stew and set bread dough to rise. By the time he came back in, stamping snow from his boots, the kitchen was warm and fragrant with cooking food. "Smells like heaven in here," he said, hanging up his coat. "I don't know how I survived 3 years without proper cooking." "Stubbornness and bacon, apparently," Hannah teased. The storm did indeed turn into a blizzard, and by afternoon the world beyond their windows had disappeared into a white fury of wind and snow. They were completely isolated, cut off from town and neighbors, alone together in their warm house while nature raged outside. Hannah found she didn't mind at all. They spent the afternoon in the parlor, Colton working on mending tack, while Hannah sewed curtains for the kitchen from fabric she'd ordered from the general store. The fire crackled cheerfully in the hearth, and occasionally one of them would speak, sharing a thought or a story, but the silences between were comfortable and full. "Tell me about your parents," Colton said eventually, setting aside the bridle he'd been repairing. "You've mentioned them, but I don't really know the whole story." Hannah set down her sewing, gathering her thoughts. It had been 5 years since the typhoid epidemic that took them, but the grief had dulled to a manageable ache. "My father was a clerk in a shipping office," she said. "Not a particularly exciting life, but he was steady and kind. He read to us every evening, me and my brother Thomas, from whatever books he could borrow or afford to buy. He wanted us to have education, to have opportunities he'd never had." "And your mother?" "She was strong. Stronger than anyone gave her credit for. She took in sewing to supplement Father's income, worked her fingers raw to make sure we always had enough. When they both got sick, she made Father promise to make sure Thomas and I would be taken care of. He died first, and she followed 3 days later." Hannah's voice thickened with remembered grief. "I was 19. Thomas was 17. Suddenly, we were alone." Colton moved to sit beside her, taking her hand. "I'm sorry. Losing both parents at once. I can't imagine. Thomas tried to take care of me, got a job on the docks, wanted to earn enough to keep us together, but the work was dangerous and the pay was terrible. When he got the opportunity to sign onto a merchant ship, he took it. Thought he'd make better money, send some home to me." She paused, fighting back tears. "The ship went down in a storm off Cape Cod. They never even recovered the bodies." "Oh, Hannah." Colton pulled her close, and she let herself lean into his strength. "That's when I went to work in the mill. It was the only job I could get that paid enough to survive. But I hated every minute of it. The noise, the danger, the way the foreman looked at me like I was something he could use and discard." She pulled back to look at Colton. "That's why I answered James's advertisement. Not just for security, but for escape, for a chance at something better." "And instead you got me," Colton said wryly. Instead, I got you, Hannah agreed, smiling through her tears, which turned out to be so much more than I ever dared hope for. They sat together in the firelight, holding each other while the storm howled outside, and Hannah felt a deep sense of peace. She'd found what she'd been looking for without even knowing she was searching, not just safety, but home, not just security, but love. As evening fell and they prepared dinner together, Hannah broached a subject that had been on her mind for weeks. Colton, I want to talk about something, about Grace's room. She felt him tense beside her, his hand stilling on the plate he'd been setting on the table. What about it? It's been closed up for 3 years, and I understand why. I do. But I think it might be time to not forget, never forget, but maybe to let some light back in, to honor her memory by not keeping her room like a sealed tomb. Colton was quiet for a long moment, his expression shadowed. When he finally spoke, his voice was rough with emotion. I don't know if I can. Every time I think about opening that door, changing anything in there, it feels like I'm losing her all over again. Hannah moved to him, taking his face in her hands. You're not losing her. She's a part of you, a part of your story, and nothing can change that. But Colton, we're building a future together, and I hope, I pray, that future might include children, our children. And when that happens, wouldn't you want Grace's things to be used again? Wouldn't she want her toys and her rocking horse to bring joy to another child rather than gathering dust in a closed room? She watched emotions play across his face, grief, fear, hope, and finally, slowly, acceptance. When did you get so wise? He asked, his voice breaking. I'm not wise. I'm just someone who knows what it's like to hold on to the past so tightly that you can't reach for the future. Hannah kissed him gently. We don't have to do anything today, or tomorrow. But maybe, when you're ready, we could open that room together, sort through Grace's things, keep what's precious, and let the rest serve new purposes. Honor her by living, not by freezing time. Colton pulled her close, burying his face in her hair. I don't deserve you. Yes, you do. We both deserve happiness, Colton. We've both earned it through the hard times we've survived. The storm lasted 3 days, burying the ranch under 2 feet of snow and transforming the landscape into an alien world of white. But inside their house, Hannah and Colton created their own world, cooking together, talking late into the night, making love by firelight, learning each other in the profound way that only time and intimacy allow. On the 3rd morning, Hannah woke to find Colton standing by the bedroom window, staring out at the snow-covered prairie. She joined him, slipping her arm around his waist. What are you thinking about? The future, he said quietly. About children, about building something that lasts, about how a year ago I thought I'd spend the rest of my life alone, and now I can't imagine it without you. Hannah's heart swelled with love for this man who'd been broken by loss and was learning, slowly, to hope again. I can't imagine it without you either, she said. When the storm finally broke and the sky cleared to a brilliant blue, Colton dug paths through the snow to the barn and outbuildings. The cattle had weathered the storm well and the ranch emerged intact. Life resumed its patterns, Colton working with the stock and the land, Hannah managing the house and the accounts. But something had shifted during those 3 days of isolation. A week after the storm, Colton came to Hannah as she was preparing dinner. I'm ready, he said simply, to open Grace's room. Will you help me? They climbed the stairs together, hand in hand, and stood before the closed door. Colton's hand trembled slightly as he reached for the knob, and Hannah covered it with her own, lending him strength. Inside, the room was exactly as Hannah remembered from her brief glimpse weeks ago, frozen in time, a memorial to a little girl who'd loved and been loved. The dust motes danced in the late afternoon sunlight streaming through the clean windows. Colton moved slowly to the rocking horse in the corner, running his hand over the painted wood. My father made this. Grace loved it so much. She'd sing to it, tell it stories. Then we'll keep it, Hannah said softly, for our children someday, so they can know they had a sister who came before, who was loved and is remembered. They spent the next hour sorting through the room together. Some things they carefully packed away in the chest, Grace's favorite doll, her tiny shoes, the quilt Emma had made for her crib. These would be kept, treasured, remembered. Other things, the rocking horse, the toys, the small bed, would be stored in the attic until they were needed again, ready to bring joy to another child. By the time they finished, the room was empty but no longer frozen. It was simply a room now, waiting for a new purpose, a new chapter. "Thank you," Colton said, pulling Hannah close. "I couldn't have done this without you." "Yes, you could have, but I'm glad you didn't have to." Christmas came, and with it, a thaw both literal and metaphorical. The snow melted enough to make the roads passable, and Sarah came to visit, bringing gifts and news from town. "Catherine Thornton left," she announced over coffee in the warm kitchen. "Went back to Philadelphia 2 weeks ago. Apparently ranch life wasn't quite what she expected."
I can't say I'm sorry," Hannah admitted. "No one is, except possibly her mother-in-law, who's now stuck with an empty ranch to manage." Sarah grinned wickedly. "Rumor has it, Mrs. Agnes is furious. She spent all that money convincing Catherine to move west, and now she's left high and dry." "What will happen to the Blackwell place?" Colton asked.
"It's going up for sale again. Though I don't know who'll want it. Catherine let it run down badly in the few weeks she was there. Didn't know the first thing about ranching and was too proud to ask for help." Hannah felt a pang of sadness for the ranch that James Blackwell had built with such care, now neglected and declining. But she also felt a stirring of possibility. "Colton," she said slowly, an idea forming, "what if we bought it?" He looked at her in surprise. "The Blackwell place?" "Think about it. It's good land and it borders our property. If we could buy it at a reasonable price, we could expand our operation significantly. It's what you wanted anyway. To build something lasting, something that grows." Sarah was watching them both with interest. "You know, that's not a bad idea. The land is solid, and if you could get it cheap because of its current condition, it would be a smart investment." Colton was quiet, considering. Hannah could see him working through the implications, the possibilities. "We'd need to take out a loan," he said finally. "And it would be a risk. If we had a bad year, we could lose everything." "Or we could build something extraordinary," Hannah countered, "something worthy of James's memory. He wanted that land to thrive, to be part of a real legacy. What better way to honor him than to make sure it does?" The idea took root and grew. By early January, Colton had approached the bank about a loan. The terms were reasonable. Mr. Peterson at the bank had faith in Colton's reputation and Hannah's proven ability to manage accounts. By the end of the month, they'd purchased the Blackwell Ranch for a fraction of what it would have been worth under proper management. "We're ranchers now," Colton said with a mixture of pride and trepidation as they signed the final papers. "Real ranchers with enough land to build something significant." "We were always going to build something significant," Hannah replied. "Now we just have more room to do it." Winter gave way to spring, and the prairie came alive with new growth. Hannah and Colton worked harder than ever, managing both properties, making improvements, planning for the future. They hired 2 ranch hands to help with the increased workload, and slowly, the neglected Blackwell Ranch began to recover under their care. It was exhausting work, but Hannah had never been happier. She'd found her place, her purpose. She wasn't just surviving anymore. She was thriving, building something real and lasting alongside a man who valued her as an equal partner. In late March, on a morning when the prairie was painted gold with early wildflowers, Hannah woke feeling strange. Not ill exactly, but different. A particular kind of exhaustion, a sensitivity to smells, a feeling she'd heard other women describe but never experienced herself. She lay in bed, one hand resting on her still flat stomach, and felt hope and joy and terror all mixed together. A baby. She was almost certain she was carrying Colton's child. She didn't tell him immediately. She wanted to be sure, wanted to see the doctor in town and have it confirmed. But when Dr. Morrison examined her a week later and gave her the news she'd been hoping for, she could barely contain her excitement. She chose to tell Colton that evening after supper as they sat together in the parlor. He was reviewing accounts, a task he now trusted to her oversight, but occasionally checked himself, and she was mending one of his shirts. "Colton," she said, setting down her sewing, "I have something to tell you." Something in her voice made him look up immediately, his expression alert. "What's wrong?" "Nothing's wrong. Everything is perfect, actually." Hannah took a deep breath, her heart racing. I'm pregnant. We're going to have a baby. For a long moment, Colton simply stared at her, his expression unreadable. Then, slowly, his face transformed, wonder, joy, and an emotion so profound Hannah felt tears spring to her eyes just witnessing it. A baby, he whispered. We're having a baby. He was across the room in an instant, pulling her into his arms, holding her as if she were made of spun glass and might break at any moment. Hannah. My God, Hannah. His voice was thick with emotion. Are you sure? Is everything all right? I'm sure. Dr. Morrison confirmed it. The baby should arrive in October, just before the first frost. She pulled back to look at him, suddenly anxious. Are you happy? I know this is fast and with grace. Happy? Colton cupped her face in his hands, his blue eyes blazing with emotion. Hannah, I'm terrified and thrilled and so grateful I can barely breathe. This baby isn't replacing Grace. Nothing could. But it's proof that life continues, that hope is real, that we can build a future together. He kissed her then, deep and thorough, and Hannah felt her anxiety dissolve. They would face this together, whatever came. The months that followed were filled with preparation and anticipation. Sarah was beside herself with joy, immediately beginning to knit blankets and baby clothes. The ranch hands offered shy congratulations. Even some of the townspeople who'd been skeptical about the marriage seemed to soften, as if a baby legitimized what they doubted before. Hannah's body changed as spring turned to summer. Her belly swelled with the growing life inside her, and she felt the baby move for the first time in late June, a flutter like butterfly wings that made her laugh with wonder and call for Colton to come feel. There, she said, placing his hand on her stomach. Did you feel that? His expression was one of pure awe. That's our child. Our baby. His voice broke. I can't believe I get to have this again. This gift. As summer wore on and Hannah grew larger and more uncomfortable in the heat, Colton became increasingly protective. He tried to take over all her tasks, worried about her exerting herself. I'm pregnant, not made of porcelain, Hannah protested when he insisted she stop hanging laundry. Women have been having babies while doing far more strenuous work than this since the beginning of time. Not my wife, Colton said stubbornly. Not if I can help it. It was endearing and exasperating in equal measure, but Hannah couldn't help but love him for it. In August, they received unexpected news. A family from Kansas was interested in buying the old Blackwell house and a portion of the land. They'd heard about the property being available and wanted to establish a small ranch of their own. We could sell them the house and 50 acres, Colton said thoughtfully. Keep the rest of the land for grazing. That would give us some capital to invest in improvements and help pay down the loan faster. It was a good business decision, and Hannah agreed. The sale went through quickly, and by September they had new neighbors, a young couple named the Mitchells with 2 small children. Hannah liked them immediately, especially Mrs. Mitchell, who was warm and practical and delighted to have another woman nearby. As September gave way to October and Hannah's due date approached, she found herself increasingly anxious. Childbirth was dangerous, especially out here far from sophisticated medical care. Women died in childbirth all the time. Babies died. She tried not to think about Grace, about Emma dying in childbirth with her, but the fear was there, hovering at the edges of her consciousness. Colton felt it too. She could see it in the way he watched her, in the tension that never quite left his shoulders. They didn't speak of it directly, but the unspoken fear lived between them. Sarah came to stay as Hannah's time drew near, prepared to help with the birth. Dr. Morrison had promised to come when labor started, but it would take time to fetch him from town. The labor began on a cool October morning, just as the sun was rising and painting the prairie gold. Hannah woke to the first pains and knew immediately what was happening. Colton, she said, reaching for him. It's time. She'd never seen him move so fast. Within minutes, he'd sent one of the ranch hands galloping to town for Dr. Morrison and helped Hannah downstairs to the bedroom they'd prepared. Sarah took over with calm efficiency, getting Hannah comfortable and timing the pains. The labor was long, hours that blurred together in a haze of pain and fear and determination. Dr. Morrison arrived around noon and examined her with practiced efficiency. Everything looks good, he said encouragingly. First babies take their time, but you're progressing well. Strong and healthy, both of you. Colton stayed by her side the entire time, holding her hand, wiping her forehead, whispering encouragement when the pain became almost unbearable. His presence was an anchor, steady and strong, reminding her she wasn't alone in this. As the sun began to set, painting the room in shades of amber and gold, the baby finally decided to make its entrance into the world. One final push, one moment of searing pain, and then a cry. Strong and lusty and beautiful. "It's a girl," Dr. Morrison announced, holding up the squalling infant. A healthy baby girl. Hannah collapsed back against the pillows, exhausted and exhilarated, while Sarah quickly cleaned and wrapped the baby. Then, finally, her daughter was placed in her arms, tiny and perfect, with dark hair like her father, and lungs that suggested she'd have no trouble making her presence known. "Hello, little one," Hannah whispered, tears streaming down her face. "We've been waiting for you." Colton was crying too, unashamedly, as he stared at his daughter with an expression of such profound love and gratitude that it made Hannah's heart ache. "She's perfect," he choked out. "Hannah, she's absolutely perfect." "What will you name her?" Sarah asked, her own eyes damp as she watched her brother hold his new daughter for the first time. Hannah and Colton looked at each other, and understanding passed between them without words. "Clara," Hannah said softly. "Clara Grace Sullivan." Colton's face crumpled with emotion at the name, honoring both the past and the future, remembering the daughter he'd lost while celebrating the daughter he'd gained. "Clara Grace," he repeated, pressing a kiss to his daughter's downy head. "Welcome home, little one." The days and weeks that followed were exhausting and wonderful in equal measure. Clara proved to be a healthy, hungry baby who kept them up at all hours but rewarded them with smiles and coos that made every sleepless night worthwhile. Hannah recovered well from the birth, and slowly they adjusted to life as a family of 3. Colton was a devoted father, taking Clara with him on his morning rounds when weather permitted, talking to her constantly even though she couldn't possibly understand his words. "I want her to know my voice," he explained to Hannah. "Want her to grow up feeling safe and loved every moment of her life." As winter approached again, Hannah found herself reflecting on everything that had changed in just over a year. She'd arrived in Colorado one day late, believing her life was over, her dreams destroyed. She'd stood on that train platform with nothing but a battered satchel and broken hopes, unable to see any path forward. But she'd been wrong. So very wrong. That delay, that one day that had seemed like the worst possible timing, had been exactly right. If she'd arrived on time, she would have married James Blackwell. A good man by all accounts, but a stranger. She would have had a decent life, probably, a comfortable existence. But she would never have known Colton, never experienced the profound love and partnership they'd built together. Never held Clara in her arms. One evening in late November, as the first serious snow of the season began to fall, Hannah stood at the kitchen window watching Colton play with Clara on the floor of the parlor. He was making funny faces and she was giggling, her laughter like music filling the house. Sarah had come to visit and stood beside Hannah, following her gaze. "You know," Sarah said thoughtfully, "when you first arrived, when I saw you sitting in that station, devastated and lost, I never imagined it would lead to this, to you and Colton finding each other, to Clara, to all of this happiness." "Neither did I," Hannah admitted. "I thought my life was ending. Turns out it was just beginning." "James would be happy, I think," Sarah continued, "to know that his loss led to something beautiful, that even though you never got to marry him, you still found your way to exactly where you needed to be." Hannah thought about that, about James Blackwell, the man she'd never met, whose death had seemed like tragedy but had actually been the beginning of her real story. "I hope so," she said quietly. "I like to think he's somewhere, somehow knowing that the woman who came to marry him found love anyway, that nothing was wasted." "Nothing is ever wasted," Sarah said firmly. "Every step, even the painful ones, leads somewhere. You just have to trust the path." As the snow fell heavier outside and the warmth of the house wrapped around them, Hannah moved to join her husband and daughter. Colton looked up as she approached, his face lighting with the smile that still made her heart skip. Come sit with us, he said, making room for her. Clara was just telling me a very important story about her toes. Hannah settled beside them, Clara reaching for her with chubby hands. She looked around at the house she'd brought back to life, at the family she'd helped create, at the future that stretched before them full of possibility and promise. The following spring, they received an inquiry from a young couple in Pennsylvania, another mail-order bride arrangement that hadn't worked out. The woman arriving to find her intended had died in a mining accident. Hannah read the letter and felt profound sympathy for the woman's situation, recognizing her own desperation in the carefully written words. "We should help her," Hannah said to Colton. "Find her a position somewhere. Help her get established. No one should face what I faced alone." And so they did, reaching out to the Mitchells, who were looking for household help. The woman arrived in April, grateful and hardworking, and slowly built a new life for herself in Colorado. It became a pattern over the years. Hannah and Colton became known as people who helped mail-order brides whose arrangements fell through, offering employment, connections, and compassion to women who'd come west hoping for a better life and found disappointment instead. "You're building something bigger than a ranch," Sarah observed one day, as they watched another young woman settle into work at a neighboring property Hannah had helped arrange. "You're building a community, a network of women helping women." "I'm just doing what people did for me," Hannah replied. "Colton, you, Dr. Morrison, you all helped me when I had nothing. This is how I pay that forward." As the years passed, Sullivan's reach continued to grow and prosper. They expanded their herd, improved their land, built a small school that served the growing community of ranches in the area. Clara grew from a baby to a toddler to a bright, curious child who loved the prairie as much as her parents did. And then, when Clara was 3, Hannah discovered she was pregnant again. This time a son arrived, strong and healthy, and they named him Thomas James, honoring Hannah's lost brother and Colton's lost friend. The house that had once echoed with silence and grief now rang with children's laughter. The land that had seemed harsh and unforgiving became home in the truest sense. The future they'd been so afraid to hope for became reality, day by day, choice by choice, love by love. On a warm October evening 5 years after Clara's birth, Hannah and Colton sat on the bench beneath the oak tree by the house, the bench James Blackwell had built for a wife he'd never met. Clara was chasing fireflies in the gathering dusk while Thomas toddled after her on unsteady legs, and Sarah's laughter drifted from the house where she was visiting for the weekend. "Do you ever think about it?" Hannah asked, leaning against Colton's shoulder. "About how different everything would be if I'd arrived on time." "Sometimes," Colton admitted. "But then I remember what you said on our wedding day, that you arrived exactly when you were meant to. And you were right, Hannah. You were right about all of it." Hannah watched their children play, watched the sun set over the land they'd built together, and felt a peace so profound it brought tears to her eyes. She'd come west looking for security and found so much more. She'd arrived one day late for one man and exactly on time for another. She'd survived loss and disappointment and fear and emerged stronger on the other side. This life, this beautiful, messy, imperfect, extraordinary life, hadn't been the one she'd planned. It was so much better. "I love you," she whispered to Colton. "I love you too," he replied, pulling her close. "My wife, my partner, the woman who arrived right on time for me." And as the stars began to emerge in the vast Colorado sky and their children's laughter filled the evening air, Hannah knew with absolute certainty that every step of her journey, every hardship, every